No, pues algo vale. Oh, it's a ton delayed. Fuck.
However you feel about spreadsheets, doing the numbers is easier with Xero. Try Xero free for 30 days.
And let's continue this conversation now with Amir Adaran in Ottawa. He's a professor of law and medicine at the University of Ottawa. Sir, I'm sure you've heard my colleague's comments, Evan, with respect to Quebec, with respect to a possible curfew.
This is freaking me out. It's so hard.
Let's continue this conversation now with Amir Adaran in Ottawa. He's a professor of law and medicine at the University of Ottawa. I'm sure you've heard my colleague's comments, Evan, with respect to Quebec, with respect to a possible curfew.
This is freaking me out. It's so hard.
Let's continue the conversation now with Amir Adaran in Ottawa. He's a professor of law and medicine at the University of Ottawa. Sure, you heard my colleague's comments, Evan, with respect to Quebec, with respect to a possible curfew.
This is freaking me out. It's so hard.
Continue the conversation with Amir Adaran in Ottawa. He's a professor of law and medicine at the University of Ottawa. Sure, you heard my colleague's comments, Evan, with respect to Quebec, with respect to a possible That's pretty powerful what you're saying, because our understanding thus far, especially from the Prime Minister last night and in just speaking with Evan, is that tomorrow really is going to be the Prime Minister, from his words, I'm paraphrasing, saying, look, I'm here to provide support for the provinces, but really it's up to the provinces to take the reins and move forward and really try to get these cases down. But what you're saying, and I'm guessing, urging the Prime Minister to do is just move ahead, move full speed ahead with locking down, with shutting down.
You know, the United States Supreme Court has a beautiful expression, and it goes somewhat like this. They say, the Constitution is not a suicide pact. Good advice. But if in Canada we look at the Constitution and say, golly gee, you know, there's 15,000 of us dead, that'll probably double if we don't do anything, and the Constitution doesn't let us, too bad, so sad. If that's our attitude as a country, we are turning the Constitution into a suicide pact. Simply cannot be. It's not the actual law. It is the attitude of what I respectfully say is a very scared and over his head Prime Minister. His father used emergency powers for inflation, for God's sake. This is so much worse. It's destroyed our economy, it's destroyed lives, and we have now the unambiguous, doubtless scientific evidence that the virus today is worse than it was last year. This is why we're seeing giant explosions of cases in the United Kingdom, for instance. That's where this virus is from. We either deal with this scientific reality using the constitutional features we have had since 1867 as a country, or we cower in a corner of the Prime Minister's office and do nothing and watch ourselves die. It
It's
is
tough
really
though,
that
right?
simple.
The consequences, Amir, are really, really dire because on the one hand, a complete
Yes.
shutdown, a complete blocking of everything, the economic ramifications of that, I can't even imagine what that would look like. Do you have strong evidence of these curfew measures, of the lockdowns being incredibly impactful in terms of getting those cases down and having a, shall I say, a limited impact on the economic machine of said country?
Sure, and that clearest instance is Atlantic Canada, which locked down and kept numbers down ever since the spring. And their economies, the provincial governments of the Atlantic, are outperforming in the last quarter all the other provinces. Likewise, Australia hit and particularly in Melbourne, where they had an awful outbreak during their winter, they hit it hard with a lockdown lasting months. They're out of it. Life is back to normal, and the Australian economy is stronger than the Canadian economy now. So, you know, you can't have a strong economy with sick people living. And to think that there's a trade-off there is simply wrong. You have to have healthy people able to work, not cowering in their homes in order medicine. I'm sorry to say what I'm saying. I opened this interview by telling you it was heartbreaking and one of the hardest things I've ever had to say.
Right.
But I do feel, I know as a scientist and as a lawyer, that on the one hand, we're in the biggest danger we've ever been, and on the other hand, we have the legal tools to deal with it federally if the provinces choose not to.
Okay, a lot to consider there, sir, especially just on this whole curfew front as we wait and see what exactly transpires in Quebec, if in fact they do enact that curfew later today. From Ottawa, Amir Araran, Professor of Law and Medicine at the University of Ottawa. Thank you for your time.
Thanks so much. Stay safe.
You too.
The gentleman's parliamentary inquiry constitutes debate, which is not permitted in the joint session under Section 18 of Title III United States Code. For that, Mr. Blunt.
Mr. President,
Do you think this is on? I don't believe it's on.
Where am I?
Are you ready? Let's get order.
Mr. President,
Order in the chamber.
Mr. President,
Gentlemen will continue.
the certificate of the electoral vote of the state of Alabama seems to be regular in form and authentic, and it appears therefrom that Donald J. Trump of the state of Florida received 9 votes for president, and Michael R. Pence of the state of Indiana received 9 votes for vice president.
Are there any objections to counting the certificate of vote of the state of Alabama that the teller has verified appears to be regular in form and authentic? Hearing none. This certificate from Alaska, the parliamentarians advise me, is the only certificate of vote from that state that purports to be a return from the state, and that has annexed to it a certificate from an authority of the state purporting to appoint and ascertain electors.
Mr. President, the certificate of the electoral vote of the state of Alaska seems to be regular in form and authentic, and it appears therefrom that Donald J. Trump of the state of Florida received 3 votes for president, and Michael R. Pence of the state of Indiana received 3 votes for vice president.
Are there any objections to counting the certificate of vote of the state of Alaska that the teller has verified appears to be regular in form and authentic? Hearing none, this certificate from Arizona, the parliamentarians advised me, is the only certificate of vote that the state purports to be a return from the state, and that has annexed to it a certificate from an authority of that state purporting to appoint or ascertain electors.
I'm sure do, yeah.
Mr. President, the certificate of the electoral vote of the state of Arizona seems to be regular in form and authentic, and it appears therefrom that Joseph R. Biden Jr. of the state of Delaware received 11 votes for president, and Kamala D. Harris of the state of California received 11 votes for vice president.
Are there any objections to counting the certificate of vote of the state of Arizona that the teller has verified appears to be regular in form and authentic?
Mr. Vice President, I, Paul Gosar from
For
Arizona.
what purpose does the gentleman from Arizona rise?
I rise up for myself and 60 of my colleagues to object to the counting of the electoral ballots from Arizona.
Is the objection in writing and signed by a senator?
Yes, it is.
It is.
Come on, Ted Cruz. Come on, live.
An objection presented in writing and signed by both a representative and a senator complies with the law. Chapter 1 of Title 3 of the United States Code. The clerk will report the objection.
Objection to counting the electoral votes of the state of Arizona. We, a member of the House of Representatives and a United States Senator, object to the counting of the electoral votes of the state of Arizona on the grounds that they were not, under all of the known circumstances, regularly given.
Are there further objections to the certificates from the state of Arizona? The chair hears none. The two houses will withdraw from joint session. Each house will deliberate separately on the pending objection and report its decision back to the joint session. The Senate will now retire to its chamber.
No, I'm not screwing me. What?
However you feel about spreadsheets,
And let's continue this conversation now with Amir Adaran in Ottawa. He's a professor of law and medicine at the University of Ottawa. Sir, And let's continue this conversation now with Amir Adaran in Ottawa. He's a professor of law and medicine at the University.
Almost lifestyle. Dun, 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 dun.
Is the cost of heating your home stretching your budget? Our home winterproofing program can help with home improvements at no cost to you. Whether you're a homeowner or renter, if you qualify, you'll receive new insulation.
You're telling me I've got to forget about what the Democrats are doing right now, present tense, because it might set a bad precedent for the future, even though the Democrats are already doing it right now. This reminds me of what we always hear from the squishy Republicans on big tech censorship. They say, we can't ever use the government to stop the left from censoring conservatives right now in the here and now, because if we do that, then they might use it to censor us in the future, even though they're already censoring us in the present. Well, then I don't care about that hypothetical. I care about what's happening right now. I'm not going to give the left an actual victory right now so that I can maybe win a hypothetical victory in the future after I've already lost right now. That doesn't make any sense. I'm worried about the present tense, not the precedents. Can I get an amen to that?
We ask it in the name of the monotheistic God, Brahma, and God known by many names, by many different faiths. A man and a woman.
Amen and a woman. That is some silly Democratic representative. I don't even remember his name. This Democratic representative was giving this sort of prayerful invocation. And of course, he doesn't know the meaning of the word amen. Amen does not have anything to do with being male or female. It's a very ancient Hebrew word, and it has nothing to do with sex whatsoever. Okay, fair enough. So we're all laughing at this guy. We're all correcting him. I think that's the wrong strategy. I think that completely misunderstands what's happening. Conservatives are getting this all wrong in the same way that they get political correctness wrong more generally. It is not enough to laugh at these guys. While we're busy laughing and correcting these guys on these silly redefinitions and ridiculous etymologies, they're scoring victories. That's what happened. Remember Latinx? Remember how we all joked about that? Remember how we all joked about turning chairman into chairperson or chairwoman. That was a little, I guess it was in the 90s, people joked about that. Then it happened. The Latinx thing is being totally mainstreamed. He or her, zer, being totally mainstreamed. The singular they, being totally mainstreamed. What happens is the left doesn't care about these etymologies. The left doesn't care. They're not going to feel embarrassed if you say, wait, actually, amen has nothing to do with men or women. You're going to say, yeah, whatever. Now it's political. Now you better say amen or a woman. I have a strong hunch that this phrase is actually going to be mainstreamed. Beyond that, listen to the new standard. He says, he invokes the monotheistic God, the name of the monotheistic God, Brahma. Brahma is not the monotheistic God. Brahma is the name of a pagan deity from South Asia that is a foreign deity in the United States. But there's the establishment of a new standard. And this new standard is secular liberalism, and the new standard is enforced by politically correct speech codes and politically correct behavior codes. And we giggle and we correct them, and they enforce the standard. There is a way around this, but it's going to be very difficult for conservatives. The way that the left is able to trample the culture and establish these new standards and get people to start saying a woman, which they're actually going to do. Remember, they changed rest in peace to rest in power. Rest in power doesn't make any sense, but the left all says it now. So, I mean, the left changed Christmas trees into holiday trees. What holiday are they talking about? The only holiday that has a tree is Christmas, but still people now talk about holiday trees. How? How do they do it? Because the left is willing to defend their new politically correct standards. They're willing to go out on a limb and say, you need to use the language that we want you to use. And the only way conservatives has responded is, hey, we're not going to tell you that you should say a certain thing or behave in a certain way. We would never impose on you. We would never force our views on you. You can't legislate those sort of things. But we just please don't make us do it. Not how it works, folks. Not how speech codes work. Not how language works. Not how behavior works. Either the Christmas tree is going to be, you're going to call it a Christmas tree or you're going to call it a holiday tree. But you're going to call it something. It's going to have a name. And the left is trying to push this view. Either we're going to pray to God or we're going to pray to Brahma. You're not going to pray to both. You can't pray to both, actually. And so the way political correctness advances is they destroy the old standards. They say, you're not allowed to say chairman. You're not allowed to pray to God. You're not allowed to say amen. You're not allowed to call it a Christmas tree. You're not allowed, you're not allowed, you're not allowed, you're not allowed. That's offensive. That's wrong. And because they believe in their new standard, they're willing to enforce it. We don't really believe in it anymore. The way to actually fight back against this is to publicly say amen a lot and really believe it. The way to fight back against this is to actually have a robust, I suppose you'd say, traditional culture, which is heavily, heavily Christian culture, and actually believe in it and actually be willing to make claims about it and actually say, there is one God, his name is God, and that's the God that we worship in the United States. And we don't worship a bunch of other gods. Are you willing to make that claim? Are you willing to go out there and exert those standards? Are you willing to say, hey, not only is it not the case that men can become women, but it is disordered that men should behave like women, and we should discourage them from doing it. Are you willing to go that far? Are you willing to actually, and by the way, when I say that far, I mean the thing everyone would have agreed on 10 years ago. The idea that men are not women. Because the rut that conservatives and the right are stuck in is they'll say, hey, I don't want to make any claims. Look, if you're a man and you want to pretend to be a woman, that's totally fine. I just don't make me do it. Just don't. Well, in that case, you've established the principle that a man really can become a woman, or that it's totally normal or totally acceptable. You've established the principle that a Christmas tree, maybe it's not a Christmas tree. You've established the principle that maybe the God that our nation has historically worshipped, that we can find reference to him in the Declaration of Independence and in state constitutions and in the Connecticut Code and in the writings of all of our forefathers, that maybe that God's actually Brahma, right? Maybe. It's not, though. And unless we are willing to make substantive moral claims, which frankly I think most conservatives are not, because I think we're cowardly and we think it's impolite or something, and we don't even really believe it much ourselves. Unless we're going to do that, you're going to get amen. You're not going to get it just amen. You're going to get a woman. You're going to get political correctness. This is why political correctness advances. We laugh at it, we joke about it, and they get the wins. If you enjoyed that video, be sure to hit the subscribe button so everyone waiting through the wasteland of YouTube knows that we've got the absolute top content out there.
Powered by Dreesen Trend Trucks. Who cares?
It's time we get back to what our founding fathers said is the process for selecting electors. That's the legislatures. In public view, not behind closed doors, not smoke-filled rooms, not bullying somebody
fuck
that might
smokes
get a better
anymore?
ruling. Let's get back to rule of law and follow the Constitution, Madam Speaker, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentlewoman For what purpose does the gentlewoman from California seek recognition?
To strike the last word.
Without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized for
Madam
5 minutes.
Speaker, this day marks a crossroads for American democracy. Those who object to the counting of the Electoral College votes, which reflect the votes of the American people, want to substitute their preferences for the voter's choice. That's not what our Constitution requires, and it's at odds with the American Democratic Republic. If Congress selects the next president instead of American voters, we'll have no need for an Electoral College. In fact, we'd have no need for presidential elections at all. We'd be moving from a government elected by the people to a government selected by those already governing. That's not America. In the United States, we abide by the choices of the people, not an elite few. The framers of our Constitution considered whether to have Congress select the president and specifically rejected it. Instead, they wrote Article 2 and the 12th Amendment. Article 2 creates the Electoral College, where each state appoints electors. Laws of all 50 states and DC require electors to vote for the winner of the state's popular election. Each state provides for the orderly conduct of elections, including lawful challenges, recounts, and the like. The 12th Amendment is what brings us to today. It says the
A little bit of a delay.
the general experience.
One of the most bonkers things in our culture today. I mean, amazing. That Scientology is like still a thing. I mean, I passed by the Church of Scientology here just the other day. I was like, huh, still works.
Yeah, they just moved it. When the documentary came out, some woman had just gone to see it at the movie theater, and it was on the drag, on Guadalupe, across from the university, and she drove her car through the plate glass windows of the Scientology building, and she didn't stop there. She drove around the lobby a little bit, knocking over bookshelves and stuff. So I had to issue a statement deploring violence in any form.
Was she a victim of it, or
no? She had just seen the documentary and she was really worked up.
Wow, so that's a hype. She might have some other issues.
Yeah,
maybe Scientology could have helped her.
Yeah, ironically, there might have been a course for that.
Well, it's a weird thing when you see so many people that are so successful that are Scientology. At least you used to see that. I had a neighbor who was one of the nicest guys, and he was a great guy. He was in my old neighborhood, and he was a Scientologist. And I found out in the most bizarre way, because there was a piece of land that was for sale, and he was talking about this piece of land, about possibly purchasing it, but he was going to have to put it off because he needed $50,000 because his wife was going clear.
Right.
And it was like a scene in a movie where the record skips. And I went, what? like, what are you doing? And this was me of, I was probably 28 at the time, 29. I was, the podcast has radically changed the way I look at things, because I've had a chance to educate myself and have all these conversations with brilliant people, and just enough of these conversations where I have a different perspective. But back then, I really didn't know too much about Scientology, other than I had bought a book from Dianetics online, not online, rather, on television, late night TV, 94. And they wouldn't stop sending me these pamphlets, asking me to come to all these various meetings and this and that, and sending me all these things for programs they have and discounts. And I mean, I was, in one way, I was I admired their hustle. I was like, these guys don't stop.
Right.
Like, they just kept sending this shit to my mailbox. I thought it was like a self-help book. And I would always been into like Anthony Robbins and all these different, I was into motivation. Like, what can I get that's going to help me like work harder or succeed better, whatever. So I saw this thing and it was like, wow, this seems very compelling. And I knew that there was a bunch of famous people that were Scientologists, like Tom Cruise and all. Right. I was like, maybe this is legit. And I was reading it and I was like, this is like, seems odd. It seems off, without getting too much into it. So when I talked to this guy who was my neighbor, really didn't have a deep background and understanding it, but that was the beginning of me like really getting into it, like talking to him and finding out like how much money he had to spend and what was it about, and like what do they do for you. And he was explaining how nothing would ever influence you again, no negative influence. That's going clear meant. That was probably one of the first times I had ever heard that expression.
Yeah. First time I ran into it was when I was in college, and I was my girlfriend and I were living in an apartment above this little storefront, and it was Scientology, and I'd never heard of it before. And they showed me the e-meter and stuff like that, and I just thought it was interesting. I wasn't put off by it. I was, I thought maybe so. I didn't pursue it.
How old were you at the time?
I was 21, yeah. And, it was, I've always been interested in religions. It's one of the themes, I guess, of my work, and why people go into one religion, why they believe one thing rather than another. Because in America, you can believe anything you want. And, it's not true in a lot of countries, but in our country, there's a smorgasbord of religions you can choose from. And if you don't see something, you can make up your own. And, it's a very fertile religious culture, which interests me. And I, as a reporter, I think about how people have strong political beliefs, and it doesn't affect their behavior at all. Now, a lot of people like that, I'm sure. Yeah. But, if you have powerful religious beliefs, it determines your life. And, as journalists, we should pay more attention to that. So I've always been intrigued by different religious manifestations. And so Scientology was on my list. I had wanted to write about it. And because they're always scaring everybody with, threats or, shakedowns and stuff like that.
Do they still do that, or have they kind of backed off from that?
Oh, the people some of my sources for that, they hounded them mercilessly. And, they hire private investigators. They're not doing the job that private investigators they're doing is not so much to sneak up on you or, go through your trash, although they do that. It's to intimidate you. Mm-hmm. And, they had somebody following me around for a while, mainly to my public events. When I was making speeches. I'm in a band, and he came to one of my gigs.
What kind of band are you in?
It's a blues band. We play, Texas, Louisiana music. And we used to back before the pandemic. I don't know if we had a regular gig at the Skylark Lounge in East Austin. Opening.
Well, I want to come see you.
You'll be invited. Yeah, we got it. We're going to be really rusty. We need a lot of rehearsal now.
That's to be expected. So, you got really fascinated by religions, and what made you focus on Scientology? I mean, there's a lot of crazy religions out there. One of the weirdest ones about Scientology is we know who made it, right?
Yeah.
It's like him and Joseph Smith. Those are the Mormons and Scientology, the only ones where we know who the creator is.
Right.
And the Scientology one is particularly weird because he was a science fiction author. It's like that didn't raise any red flags with people. Like,
Well, you mentioned Mormons in the same breath, and I think that's apt. They were the most stigmatized religion in the 19th century. Mark Twain hated them. Zane Grey wrote a novel about how wicked they were. They were hounded from one state to another, and Scientology is kind of the modern equivalent of that. And one of the reasons I wanted to write about it is you have these famous and sometimes wealthy people, as you point out, affiliating with this organization. It must be a kind of public relations martyrdom for them. I mean, you can admire Tom Cruise or John Travolta for their acting, but you also think, are they a little nuts? Is there something going on with them that they need this religion? And so why do they affiliate? Why do they lend their celebrity and their standing to such a stigmatized religion? That was one of the reasons I wanted to write about it.
Some benefit out of it.
That's what and they do.
Yeah.
I'm not, I think especially at the lower levels, they offer courses like Jerry Seinfeld was in for a while.
I don't think he was ever in. I think he was interested in it and he was studying it.
He took some courses.
Yeah.
But
he was never committed as a Scientologist.
What is a Scientologist? I mean, once you're going to the Celebrity Center and you're taking courses, I say you're a Scientologist.
Like if you go fishing once, you go fisherman.
Yeah, that case, aren't you?
It's a good question.
I'm testing the water.
I played basketball a couple times. I'm hardly a basketball player.
It's a little different.
Is it? I mean, I guess it is. But I mean, I feel like taking courses and things doesn't.
Well,
really...
Leonard Cohen did as well.
Sure.
Rock Hudson. I mean, there were a lot of people were drawn to it, and I think part of it is Scientology set itself up as a religion for celebrities. It deliberately targeted people like that. And for instance, if you go to Hollywood and you look at prominent actors and so on, they tend not to be Southern Baptists. It's not designed for them, and they may come from a Southern Baptist background, but if they move to Hollywood and they're looking for a group of spiritual seekers like themselves, and they want to affiliate with people like them, Scientology says, here we are. And we have the Celebrity Center where people like you can come and you can hang around with other famous people.
I think they offer a certain amount of protection. I think there's something there for that. And there's also, I think, there's a structure that exists, and I think there's a lot of people that, especially in such a volatile sort of, it's a uncertain world, the world of acting in particular. Yeah. It's such a crazy world. I mean, I always said, if you want a formula, like why is LA the way it is? Well, just stop and think about what it is. You have a bunch of people that move there from somewhere else because they want fame, right? And then you make them audition, which is the weirdest thing. You go into an unnatural environment, usually a conference room. There's a bunch of people sitting around judging you, and you want them to like you enough to pick you to do this thing. So you can't in any way buck trends. You have to be like uber polite. You have whatever the ideology is that's accepted, the general vibe of Hollywood, you must conform to that. You must conform to that, right? They don't even have opinions. They have this conglomeration of opinions they've adopted in order to be let in to this tribe. And then you hope that they pick you. And so you have these incredibly insecure people who want acceptance and love, and then you make them beg for it. They're essentially going there and hoping that these people will like
That's a
them.
good one.
And that's where you get the abuse, like the Harvey Weinsteins of the world and these type of people. It's like they're preying on this need to be accepted and brought into this group in order to work, to be able to work. You have to play this fucked up game. And so if something comes along like Scientology that gives you structure and gives you family and gives you like, we are for you, we're going to help you become clear. We're going to bring you to the next level. You know, you're a success. It gives you something where you feel like have you ever done martial arts?
I did judo when I was in high school.
One of the beautiful things about martial arts is the belt system.
Yeah.
Because like you when you're a white belt and all of a sudden they tie that blue belt on your waist, like, wow, I am making progress. This is really happening, and you feel fantastic. Whereas if you went to a martial art, like I did kickboxing for a while, there's no belts, and it just feels weird. Like you don't know where you are. Like where am I? Like it's not the most success. Like and because of that, some kickboxing systems, even Muay Thai, some weird systems have developed their own belt structure, which is weird. The system they just sort of added to the existing martial art that didn't have a belt structure. But it's to give people this sense of progress, give people scaffolding, give people structure, give people this thing where you feel like something is happening for me. And I think that's one of the things that Scientology does really well for these fucked up people.
Absolutely.
Catch new episodes of the Joe Rogan Experience for free, only on Spotify. Watch back catalog JRE videos on Spotify, including clips. Easily, seamlessly switch between video and audio experience. On Spotify, you can listen to the JRE in the background while using other apps and can download episodes to save on data costs, all for free. Spotify is absolutely free. You don't have to have a premium account to watch new JRE episodes. You just need to search for the JRE on your Spotify app. Go to Spotify now to get this full episode of the Joe Rogan Experience.
Pay for your bits.
And we're live. What's going on? Did you sleep well?
I did. I didn't sleep too badly. I mean, tells are a tough thing. And we actually know the science that one half of your brain will actually not sleep as deeply than the other when you're sleeping in an unusual room, like a hotel room.
Really? That's what fucks me up. Because when I'm on the road, you know, I'll do 3 different hotels in a week. Because I'll do like a Thursday, Friday, Saturday, like with gigs. And then by the time Sunday rolls around, I'm a mess.
You're in rough shape.
Yeah. Is that what it is?
Yeah. And it's a threat detection thing. I mean, if you look at other species, they can do this much more impressively than we can. So dolphins or any sort of sea-dwelling mammal can actually sleep with half a brain. So one half of their brain goes into deep sleep. The other half is wide awake.
That's how people at the DMV do it. Those people that work at the Department of Motor Vehicles, they work half asleep. You ever meet them?
I haven't, no.
Just teasing you.
I will,
if your DMV listening, going, fuck you, man. Next time you come in to get your license renewed.
There's my next NIH grant, I think, looking at the DMV and sleep. But yeah,
TSA workers, same thing. Same type of human.
That I've come across.
Yeah. Them too. I'm just kidding, fuckers. Relax. So when you're in a hotel room, what is happening that half your brain is not really sleeping?
Yeah, so there's different stages of sleep. There are 2 principal types. One is non-rapid eye movement sleep, or non-REM sleep. The other is REM sleep, which is also known as dream sleep.
Right.
And non-rapid eye movement sleep is further divided into 4 separate stages, which are unimaginatively called stages 1 through 4. We're a creative bunch as sleep researchers. It is true, but I think it's also our low IQ. But it's the deep stages of sleep 3 and 4 of that non-rapid eye movement. That's where a lot of sort of body replenishment takes place, great for the cardiovascular system, metabolism, all of those good things. But that's the deep sleep that one half of your brain will resist going into when you're sleeping in a foreign environment. So it stays in this kind of lighter stage almost like a threat detection system.
Right.
And you can imagine why. It's an unusual context. Evolutionarily, it would make a lot of sense to just have that sort of on guard one half of the brain.
That makes so much sense, and that really, for me, it fills in the blanks of like why, even if I get 7-8 hours sleep on the road, I'm still kind of just out of it.
Yeah, and that's in fact probably one of the most impressive parts of new research on sleep. It's not just about quantity, it's also about quality. And quality can be as detrimental if you don't get it as a reduction in total quality. I mean, both are essential,
right?
But I think it speaks exactly to your point. You just don't feel like it's a refreshing sort of deep sleep.
Yeah, it feels totally different. It feels like, I guess I would say it feels like half asleep.
Yeah.
I mean, it's really kind of how it does feel.
Yeah.
One of the things that I noticed, I did this thing with my friends called Sober October, where we didn't smoke any pot or do no drinking at all, nothing for a month. And when I did it, one of the things I found was that after about, I don't know how many days, but it was noticeable that I would have these incredibly vivid dreams. And then I had read that marijuana does something to suppress heavy REM sleep. Like what is happening there?
Yeah, so both of those chemicals, both of which are used as a sleep aid, alcohol and marijuana, are actually very good at blocking your dream sleep, your rapid eye movement sleep. And so what happens is that the brain is quite clever in this regard. It builds up a clock counter of how much dream sleep you should have had, but have not been getting.
Wow.
And it starts to develop this increasing appetite and hunger for dream sleep. So that finally, when the alcohol actually gets out of your system, Sober October, love the name, that's all of a sudden where you get what's called a REM sleep rebound effect, where you not only get the normal amount of REM sleep that you would normally have, you get that, plus the brain tries to get back some of that dream sleep that it's been losing over the past maybe 11 months. So you get this.
Try 20 years.
Yeah, I didn't want to make any assumptions. So you get this REM sleep rebounded effect, and that's where you have these really intense dream sleep situations.
Yeah.
It's the same reason that they'll say, look, I had a bit too much to drink last night. Maybe it was a Friday or Saturday. They sleep in late. They say, I just had these crazy dreams. What happens there is a kind of an acute version where the alcohol is swirling around in your system. And after about 6 hours, your liver and your kidneys have finally excreted all of the alcohol. And your brain has been deprived of dream sleep for that first 6 hours. So then it feasts in the last couple of hours. And that's why you have these really bizarre dreams after you've been drinking a little bit too much.
Oh, wow. So what is happening with marijuana, though, specifically? Do you know?
Yeah, so marijuana, it does help people, it puts people to sleep quicker. Although I think that the question is whether it's really naturalistic sleep or not that they go into. Certainly with alcohol, it's not. That nightcap idea is a misnomer. Alcohol it's a form of drugs that we call sedatives. And sedation is not sleep. It's very different, but we often mistake one for the other. Marijuana, it seems to act in a physiologically very different way. It doesn't target the same receptors in the brain. So it's unclear whether the speed with which you fall asleep after having a session with marijuana is actually natural sleep. Let's assume it is. The problem, however, is that it then will start to disrupt REM sleep. It will start to block the process. We think perhaps at the level of the brainstem, which is where these two types of sleep, non-REM and REM sleep, will actually get sort of worked out. That's where marijuana may actually impact dream sleep and shut it down and block it.
Have there been any studies on chronic marijuana smokers, like those dawn to dusk type characters that just are constantly high, and what happens to their brain because they must never hit REM sleep?
Yeah, so people haven't looked at marijuana. They have looked at alcohol, though. Exactly that. So what happens is if you look at alcoholics, they will have something often when they come off alcohol, something called delirium tremens, which is where, sort of DT, there what happens is that the alcohol has been blocking dream sleep for so long, and the pressure for dream sleep is built up so powerfully in the brain, it actually just spills over into wakefulness.
Wow.
And so the brain just says, look, okay, if I'm not going to get this dream sleep whilst you're asleep, I'm just going to take it whilst you're awake. And so you start to essentially dream while you're awake. It's this sort of collision of two states of consciousness. So you get delirium.
Wow. I always thought the DTs were detoxing. When someone said someone's going through the DTs.
Okay, yeah.
So it's delirium tremor?
Yeah, delirium tremens, yeah.
Tremens.
Sort of.
So what is going on with them when this is happening? So if they are going through this delirium during the day while they're conscious, what's physiologically happening?
So it's almost as though the veil of REM sleep gets pulled over the waking brain, as it were. So you have this mixed state of consciousness that you can pick up with brainwave recordings. And it just tells me, I mean, in some ways, how necessary sleep must be. If that's the lengths that the brain will go to get that which it's been missing, just shows you why, it took Mother Nature 3.6 million years to put this thing called an 8-hour sleep necessity in place. And we've come along, and within the space of 100 years, we've lopped off almost 20% of that, if you look at the data.
Wow, really?
Yeah.
Whew. And so many people take pride in that too. I don't need 8 hours sleep. I got 3. I'm good, ready to go, kick ass and dominate the world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's the sort of like sleep machismo sort of attitude.
There is a lot of that, right?
Yeah. And
Not me, baby. I like sleep.
Well, I mean, and you'd be glad to know that men who sleep 5 to 6 hours a night will have a level of testosterone which is that of someone 10 years their senior. So a lack of sleep will age you by a decade in terms of that critical aspect of wellness, virility, muscle strength,
10
sexual
years.
performance.
That's incredible. Wow. We had a woman on the podcast. Her name's Courtney Dowalter, and she's a ultra marathon runner. And she ran, she's a real freak. I mean, like an incredible athlete. She ran this thing called the Moab 240. It's 238 miles through the Moab Mountains. And she did it 22 miles faster than the second place man. So she won it by like a whopping, I think it was 10 hours ahead of the second place winner. And she slept 1 minute the entire time. She tried to lie. This is over 3 days. I think it took her less than 3 days. I think it took her like 2 days. She slept for 1 minute during the entire time. She tried to lie down. She said she laid down for a few minutes, but she couldn't fall asleep. And then she wound up actually just taking 1 minute and going to sleep. And she said that 1 minute was like one of the most intense, restful minutes. After that minute is over, she was woken up because she told her running partner, to wake her up at a minute. And she's like, how long did you let me sleep? And he was like, 1 minute. She's like, wow, I felt great. Let's go. But she was saying that she hallucinates. And that she starts seeing like rabbits are talking to her, and she sees things that aren't there, and like mystical beings and stuff. She said it's really freaky, but she knows that she's hallucinating because she's done this. She's done a bunch of ultra marathons, so she just keeps going. She's like saying hi to rabbits. They're talking to her and stuff.
Yeah. I mean, and you see these reports too. I mean, there's a cycling race, I think it's Bike Across America. Just got to go from East Coast to West Coast in as short a time as possible. And that's exactly what they do too. It's all about managing how little sleep that you get. And they will explain these wild hallucinogenic experiences on the bike. If you look at world records for people who have tried to sort of go without sleep, one of the most famous examples is a radio disc jockey called Peter Tripp back in the, it was back in the sort of 60s, 50s, 60s. And he tried to break the world record. He went 8 days straight.
And
with
no sleep?
Yeah, he was broadcasting from Times Square. He would do a show there. And, the scientist, the psychiatrist said, look, this is a very bad idea based on what we know. Please don't do it. And he said, I'm going to do it anyway. And then the scientist, being the good scientist, they said, great, do you mind if we study you? Because it'd be a great paper to sort of, to write up. And they tracked him. And by day 3, he was having florid delusions and hallucinations. He was seeing spiders in his shoes. He became desperately paranoid. He started to think that people were trying to poison him in his food. One point, it was the middle of winter. Some guys came in with sort of these, it was New York winter time, came in with these big jackets. He thought it was the Secret Service coming to get him, and he ran out into the road. These are strange things. But so we know that same profile of just starting to become, psychotic, which is essentially what happens naturally when you dream, that you are, I mean, all of us here, as long as we slept last night, became flagrantly psychotic when we went into dream sleep. because you start to see things which are not there, so you hallucinate. You believe things that couldn't possibly be true, so you're delusional. You get confused about time, place, and person, so you're suffering from disorientation. You have wildly fluctuating emotions, something that psychiatrists call being sort of affectively labile. And then how wonderful, we both woke up this morning and we forgot most, if not all, of that dream experience.
Yeah.
So we're suffering from amnesia.
What is happening when you're having these hallucinogenic experiences? Like, what are the chemicals that are causing it? Do we know?
We do, yeah. And we've done some of these studies where we put people into brain scanners, we let them fall asleep, and then we see what happens within the brain, which parts of the brain are switching on, which parts of the brain are switching off. When you go into REM sleep, firstly, some parts of your brain become 30% more active than when you're awake. So we think of sleep as this sort of, static, passive state where everything just kind of drops down in terms of activity. It's quite the contrary. But what's also interesting is that not all parts of the brain ramp up when you go into REM sleep. Visual parts of the brain increase, motor parts of the brain increase, emotional centers and memory centers, they all increase. But the part of the brain that bucks the trend and goes in the opposite direction is the part of the brain that we call the prefrontal cortex, this sort of CEO of the brain that's very good at rational, logical thinking. That part of the brain gets shut off. So it's almost as though, the prison guards are gone and everyone runs amok because there's no controller, in place. And so we know sort of from the patterns of brain activity why you become sort of so visual, you see things, why you have motor kinesthetic activity, why things feel so emotional, but also why things seem utterly illogical and irrational. Because your frontal brain, the thing that makes us most human, you can say goodbye to that for the rest of dream sleep.
So there's no driver.
So there's no driver. Yeah.
Now, why do we forget? Why do we forget those dreams? Because I wake up and I am sure that I'm going to remember these dreams. And sometimes I do. Sometimes I remember, and I don't think I really remember them. I think what it is very much like, you ever hear someone talk about a memory from a long time ago? I used to think that people actually remembered things from a long time ago. But now what I think is they remember remembering it. I think they remember talking about it. They remember how they described it. And then they sort of remember that and repeat it. And in their mind, convince themselves that that's what happened. Because I've heard people tell stories about the past and they vary wildly from what is absolutely true. Like factual, you could check it, you could research it, you know what the facts are. But in their mind, it's very different. And I think that it's entirely possible that what people are doing is remembering the recollection of these memories and how they told them. And then also sort of people elaborate things and make themselves look better or make the situation look more dramatic. But with dreams, that doesn't make any sense. So I'm always trying to figure out, like, what is it about a dream where sometimes I can remember the dream and sometimes it's so vivid when I wake up. I'm like, holy shit, that was crazy. What a dream. And then I forget it 20 minutes later.
Right.
What is that?
So firstly, one theory of dreaming is that it's just simply a reconstruction when you wake up. So you have these fragments of activity, and what your cortex does when it wakes up is what your cortex is designed to do when you're awake normally, which is try to package everything and make a good story, make logical fit out of the world. That's one theory. I don't believe that, though. Your point is a really interesting one. Do I remember my dreams? That doesn't necessarily mean I forget my dreams. And what I mean by that is accessibility versus availability. So if you ever had that experience where you've woken up, you thought, I was definitely dreaming, I can't quite grab it, and it's gone. And then 2 days later, you're in the shower, you're sort of washing yourself, you see a bottle of shampoo, you see the label, and it just triggers the unlocking of that dream memory, and it sort of comes flooding back. Or someone says something to you and you think, oh, that was the dream.
Yeah.
What that tells me as a brain scientist is that the memory is there, it's preserved, it's available. But what happens most of the time when we wake up is that we lose the IP address to the memory. So it's present, but it's not consciously accessible. Available, not accessible. If that's true, what it means is that this type of information we know can have non-conscious impacts on our behavior all the time. There's great brain science about this non-conscious memory processing. It's possible that we store every one of our dreams. We just don't consciously have accessibility to it, but nevertheless, it's changing how we behave, how we feel each and every day. No evidence for it. It's a theory I'm still wanting to test.
I like that
but
theory.
that's possible
I like
too. And
it.
it's only that anecdote
Makes
where I
sense.
can think, I just don't remember the dream. I've forgotten it. I don't think that may be true. It may still be there. I just need to find the keys to sort of access that memory.
What's stunning to me is how quickly the dream evaporates, the memory of the dream, in relation to an actual experience. Like if we went outside and we saw some lady walk up to some guy and kick him in the balls, we'd be like, whoa, we would remember that. And that you'd be able to tell your friends, like, yeah, some lady just randomly walked up to some guy and kicked him in the balls. Like, we would remember that. And you would remember it 10 minutes later. You'd remember it an hour. You'd remember it next day. You'd be telling your friends, yeah, she just walked right up to him. I remember it like it was yesterday, because it was, right?
Yeah.
But a dream can be 10 minutes ago. And you wake up and, dude, it was King Kong, and he was swinging from my ceiling, and somehow or another he fit in the room, but the room got bigger, and you have these crazy dreams, and then 20 minutes later you forget all of it. Like, what is happening there?
So one current explanation is that the chemistry of the brain when you go into dream sleep is radically different.
Yeah.
So one of the chemicals called noradrenaline in the brain, which downstairs in the body, its sister chemical is called adrenaline. Noradrenaline actually plummets to the lowest levels. It's a stress chemical in the brain. It's one of them that gets shut off during dream sleep, which is
even if you're
remarkable.
panicking. Like, what if you fall off a building?
Well, what's interesting is that chemical is low whilst you're having that dream, but when you wake up from those, and some people often wake up, that's when you have the spike of noradrenaline. So it's still low when you're in dream sleep. But there's another chemical that goes in the opposite direction. It's called acetylcholine. It's the chemical that is actually altered in Alzheimer's disease. And these two chemicals will change essentially the input-output direction of information flow into the memory centers of the brain.
So that makes sense because people take that as a nootropic.
They do.
Yeah, that's actually an alpha brain. When you take that, it's been clinically proven to enhance memory, especially verbal memory and recollection of words and things like that.
That's right.
So that's happening while you're sleeping.
Well, so you're in REM sleep, yeah. But what may be happening are current models, if you sort of build these neural models to sort of mimic dreaming, it may be that during dreaming, it's principally about the outflow of information to generate dreams. And in fact, the chemical profile is oppositional to input, which is about saving. So it's about sort of pumping out information rather than committing information. And so when you come out of a dream sleep, you still get this sort of lingering after sort of taste of chemistry, as it were, in the brain. That means that the dreaming brain is more programmed to be outputting a narrative and an experience rather than actually committing it to memory, which is the opposite direction, if that makes sense.
It does make sense. How aware are you of dimethyltryptamine?
I'm somewhat aware of it scientifically, not personally.
Experientially?
Yeah.
Yeah. One of the things about psychedelic experiences with dimethyltryptamine, first of all, it's endogenous. Your brain produces it, your lungs, your liver produce it. But when you have a DMT experience, after it's over, the memory fades very rapidly. And it seems just like a dream in that regard, where while you're having it, what's bizarre is that you're having it while you're awake.
Yeah.
And then after you have it, within 10, 20 minutes, it is just like a dream that you can't remember. It's I remember like little flashes of experiences that I've had. And there's been a lot of speculation that that's one of the things that you're experiencing while you're in heavy REM sleep. And that could be responsible for the crazy visuals that you have that seem so vivid. I mean, there's been times where I've had dreams where I was 100% convinced that I was awake.
Yeah.
And then something happened. Like I do this thing sometimes where and if I do it consciously a lot, I think I saw in one of those wacky movies, like What the Bleep Do We Know? I think I saw it in that, where you walk up to a door. As you're walking through the door, you knock on the side of the door and go, am I awake? Nope, not awake. Or am I asleep, rather?
Yeah.
No, I'm not asleep. Because I'm knocking on the door. Well, I did that and my hand was just like going right through the wall. And I'm like, oh, I'm fucking sleeping. And then I woke up and I was like, whoa. But the feeling that I had while I was in that dream, it was so vivid. I mean, everything seemed so real. Like, what could possibly be causing me to construct this artificial reality in my mind that at the moment at least was indistinguishable from the reality that I experience right now? And I'm assuming because I just knocked on this table that I'm awake.
Yeah, I really hope I'm not just a fictive character in your dreams.
Well, maybe we're sharing a dream.
Yeah, very Inception-like.
Is that possible?
Not based on the science so far. But I think, what you're speaking about there really is almost why would Mother Nature create this thing called the dream experience? What would be the function of essentially every night going into what sums up to be about 2 total hours of virtual reality experience and testing? One possibility, which is deeply unsatisfying, is that it's just a byproduct. It's just epiphenomenal that when your brain goes into this thing called REM sleep and all of the different patterns of brain activity that we described, an offshoot is this thing that we call dreaming. In the same way that a light bulb, the reason that we construct the apparatus that's a light bulb is to produce light. But when you produce light in that way, you also produce heat. It was never the function of the light bulb. It's just what happens when you produce light in that way. Maybe dreaming is just sort of the heat of REM sleep. And REM sleep serves lots of other functions. But
wow,
that doesn't feel to me right, though.
Why?
Well, firstly, I think it's probably additionally metabolically demanding to have dreams in addition to this thing called REM sleep. And whenever Mother Nature burns calories, it's usually for a reason, because they're so precious.
That's a good point. That makes sense too. Yeah, I read some article about the lack of REM sleep with marijuana users, and it was trying to say, and it made me super skeptical even as a pot smoker, that it was trying to say that it's not bad for you because what it's essentially doing is bypassing the REM sleep and going directly into the deep sleep. And it's helping you. Does that make sense to you?
It doesn't make sense.
As a neuroscientist, he says, nay, you fucking stoners.
I'm so deeply unpopular, I'm telling people, don't smoke pot, stay away from alcohol, apart from a general personality, which is dislikable, this doesn't help me.
You're definitely not dislikable, but I don't think you're saying anything wrong. I think marijuana, like most things, is best used in moderation. And one thing that I got out of the Sober October thing wasn't just that it's fascinating to see the dreams like just ramp up and get crazy, but also that when you take a few days off and then smoke a little pot, the pot actually has more of an impact. In fact, one of my favorite psychedelic authors and lecturers, the late great Terence McKenna, his advice was to not do marijuana for long periods of time and then do as much as you could stand. And he was a real psychedelic adventurer. And his thought was to really get the benefit out of marijuana, it's not something that should be used daily and recreationally. It should be used as a psychedelic sacrament. Not should be, because he actually did smoke pot pretty regularly rather. But his thought was, if you really want to get the full impact of it, you shouldn't be accustomed to it. And when you're accustomed to it, you build up a tolerance to it. And it doesn't have the same impact. Like, it's that thing, I don't know if you've ever been around pot smokers, but when someone doesn't smoke pot and then they get talked into smoking pot with some pot smokers, it's always a terrible idea. Because you got a bunch of people with super high tolerances and some poor person that doesn't have any tolerance, and they just get taken down a tornado rabbit hole journey into their childhood.
It's like 0 to 60 in like 1.2 seconds.
They're so paranoid and thinking about everything and freaking out, all these sensations that they've just never experienced before. But the idea that you could bypass REM sleep and go straight into the deep sleep, that doesn't make any sense to you.
No, it doesn't. And what we've learned over the past sort of 30 or 40 years is all stages of sleep are important. When you think about sleep as a state, it makes no sense. Firstly, you're vulnerable to predation. You're not finding food, you're not finding a mate, you're not reproducing, you're not caring for your young. On any one of those grounds, sleep should be strongly selected against. As a collective, I mean, it's almost idiotic. If sleep does not serve an absolutely vital function, it is the biggest mistake that the evolutionary process ever made. And that counts for all of the stages of sleep too. Again, Mother Nature wouldn't waste time putting you into a state that wasn't necessary. And what we've discovered is that all of those different stages of sleep that we spoke about all have unique and separate functions. So you can't shortchange any one of them. You know, you don't need to bias towards one and try and sort of, placate the other. Evolution has taken a long time to get the blueprint accurately correct for each physiological individual. I wouldn't play around with it and think that you're smarter than that process.
Right. I when I read it, I felt like it was justification for smoking a lot of pot. Like, man, you're just getting deeper sleep, man. You don't need that REM sleep. You're passing it up, man. You just go right into the deep, heavy, necessary sleep.
Au contraire.
Au contraire, potheads. So what is happening to the body during REM sleep that's so critical, that one particular aspect of sleep?
So firstly, in the body, your cardiovascular system seems to do something quite strange. It goes through periods of dramatic acceleration and then dramatic deceleration.
During REM sleep?
Yeah, during REM sleep, quite unpredictable too. We also know that during REM sleep, your brain paralyzes your body so that your mind can dream safely. So,
wow.
And that makes a lot of sense. If you're thinking that you're this world champion mixed martial arts person, and it's in the middle of the night, it's dark, you can't see, you're not perceiving your outside world, you're going to get popped out of the gene pool very quickly if you start acting out that experience. So there is a barrier in place that Mother Nature locks you down in incarceration, muscle incarceration.
That's crazy that you say that, because when I was fighting when I was young, I would wake up throwing kicks. I would kick in the middle of the night. I would do it all the time. I'd be sleeping and I would move and throw a kick in the middle of the night. And I remember it waking me up like, what the fuck is wrong with me? Then I try to go back to sleep again. But I was obviously dreaming about competing.
Do you actually remember this? So when you woke up, did you remember dreaming at that point, or did you just have no recollection of anything going on at that point?
I believe I had a recollection. It's been a long time, but I believe I had a recollection. Like I would be like in bed with my girlfriend. I'd wake her up too, because I'd just jolt. Like I wouldn't throw a full kick, but my body would move like I was going to. Like I would turn my hips and my leg would extend. I attribute it to the idea that it's so extreme, like the activity of fighting is so extreme that my brain had kind of like hypercharged itself to compete at this very high level, and that this was like so unusual that it was almost at red alert all the time, and maybe even trying to work out patterns while I was sleeping.
That's exactly the evidence that we have now. So for things like motor skills, or even rats running around a maze where they will learn specific sort of, navigational pathways and even skilled motor movements. What you can do is you can place these electrodes into centers of the brain. We work at my sleep center works on humans, but other people have done these studies in rats. And you implant electrodes and you measure the brain cells firing as the rat is running around the maze. And let's say that you can sort of play little tones for each brain cell. So they're running around the maze and you can listen to the brain cells learning the signature of that maze. So it goes ba-ba-ba-ba-bum, ba-ba-ba-bum, ba-ba-ba-bum. What was amazing is that when you let those rats sleep, but you keep listening to the brain, what you hear is brum, 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 as if the brain is actually, and in fact it is, it's replaying the exact same sequence, the memory sequence that it was learning whilst it was awake. It's replaying, but at a speed that is 20 times faster.
Whoa.
So, now we start to get into this inception world, and I don't mean to, because the scientific data, we're not sort of in that territory, but, that notion of time compression and time dilation that Christopher Nolan played so well with in that movie, we can see that at the level of brain cell firing in rats as they're learning these mazes. And it comes back to what you're saying, which is that the better that they rehearse those skilled memories, when you wake them up and test them the next day, that predicts how much better they are in terms of their performance. So it's not just that you learn, you go to sleep, and you replay and you hit the save button on these new memories. You actually sculpt out those memories and you improve them. And we've done studies with motor skill learning, critical for athletic performance. And practice does not make perfect. Practice with a night of sleep is what makes perfect, because you come back the next day and you're 20 to 30% better in terms of your skilled performance than where you were at the end of your practice session the day before.
Wow. Wow.
I mean, sleep is the greatest legal performance enhancing drug that most people are probably neglecting in sport.
Wow. And not just for your physical performance, but actually skill learning.
That's right. Skill learning, memory, and then also, downstairs in the body, all of the recuperative benefits. And you can flip the coin, by the way. If you're getting 6 hours of sleep or less, your time to physical exhaustion drops by up to 30%. So you could spend all of your time training for a 10-round fight, perfect condition, but then I put you on 6 hours of sleep the night before. You're now going to be physically exhausted by round 7 rather than round 10.
Wow. But that's a really hard thing for fighters, because they have a very difficult time sleeping the night before a big fight.
Yep.
It's very, very difficult because
Hugely
there's anxiety
problematic.
and I would imagine it's got to be, it's probably going to take a huge toll. It's probably be a huge benefit if they can somehow or another bypass all that and just relax and learn how to relax and learn how to actually sleep.
I think it's one of, we're constantly trying to hack the physiological system, especially in elite sports these days, because small fractions of a percent of gain can make a huge difference.
Well, that sounds like 30%. That's a monster.
Huge, yeah. Your time to sort of not just physical exhaustion, but the lactic acid builds up quicker the less and less that you sleep. Your ability of the lungs to actually expire carbon dioxide and inhale oxygen decreases the less sleep that you have.
That makes so much sense. Wow, because when I was doing Fear Factor, and I was doing stand-up comedy, and then I was also doing another television show, and I was doing jujitsu. I never got.
We know who you are. Okay.
Mostly got 4. Usually got 4, and my cardio always sucked.
Yeah.
It was always terrible, and I'd be like, "Why does my cardio suck? I work out so much." Like that was probably what it was.
Yeah, it's a huge part of the
Wow. Now, how many hours of sleep should you get?
Somewhere between 7 to 9 hours. Once you get below 7 hours of sleep, we can measure objective impairments in your brain and your body.
I can show that in the last 2 days. And I can show it because I basically did the same workout 2 days in a row. The day before, I'd flown back from Boston, very tired. Hung out with my kids all day, went to get some sleep, but then I had to do some stuff at like 2 o'clock in the morning. And I just never really got good sleep. And then my youngest daughter got up at 5. She was crying. And then eventually my alarm went off at 8. So my sleep was like 3-4 hours. It was all screwy. And the night before was even less because I had flown and I had to get up early for the flight. And I tried to sleep on the plane. And I went running and I felt like dog shit.
Yeah.
And then during the day, I felt like dog shit. I just didn't have, as I was running, I just didn't have any extra gear. I was like, ugh. I did it. I pushed through it, but then it was over. I was like, oh. Well, last night I slept 7.5 hours. Woke up today, lifted weights, ran, felt great. Feel great now. Like 2 days in difference. That's the difference. The difference is one day I got real sleep. One day I didn't. I did the exact same thing. Even more today. I lifted weights today as well, and I just feel great. So I could see it physiologically in the difference in my performance in 24 hours.
Yeah, and that's noticeable. We see that too. Your peak muscle strength, your physical vertical jump height, and your peak running speed, all of those things correlate with sleep. The less that you have, the worse those outcomes are. Probably one of the most surprising factors, though, was injury risk. When they've looked at athletes across a season and they've just plotted, how frequently will they get injured? And then they surveyed them, how much sleep were you getting? And they bucketed them into sort of people who are getting 9 hours, 7 hours, 6, 5, 4. And it's a perfect linear relationship. The less sleep that you have, higher your injury risk. So people getting 9 hours versus 5 hours, there was almost a 60% increase in probability of injury risk during the season.
Do you attribute that to exhaustion, or do you attribute that to a lack of recovery from the previous night's workout? Is it a combination of those things? Is exhaustion causing you to misstep perhaps and like twist an ankle or turn a knee?
Yeah, it's all of those things.
All of those
I mean, even if you look at microbalance, if you look at sort of these stability muscles versus, major muscles, those stability muscles also fail when you're not getting sufficient sleep. And I think we often underestimate how critical they are in sport performance, particularly in terms of combating and placating injury risk too. So if you just get someone on a stability ball, sort of just dose them down with sleep, 8 hours, 5 hours, 3 hours, and just notice how those stability muscles help you balance, just the basic act of balance, that deteriorates dramatically. No wonder you're getting more injury risk.
Totally makes sense. Now, as a neuroscientist, what do you attribute when people talk about visualization? And visualization is it's a huge factor in improving technical skills, specifically martial arts, which is I'm a big fan of, obviously. Martial arts, when you visualize, people who visualize, who sit down and like go over their body, going through the motions and doing things, those people perform better. They perform better. They learn quicker. What do you attribute that to? Do you think it's the same thing as what's happening when you're sleeping, just maybe to a lesser extent?
I think it's to a lesser extent, but people have done those studies where they've looked at sort of whether you actually physically practice, let's say on a keyboard, just because it's easier to sort of manage in a laboratory, versus just imagining sort of typing out that sequence. And just the act of physical visualization of sort of imagination of that motor skill, it's about 50% as effective as physically performing it too. And it's 50% as effective, what I mean there is in changing the plastic connections within the brain. Whoa. So even just visualization, passive play, as it were, still can actually cause a rewiring of the brain beneficially.
Wow. Learning techniques, specifically martial arts techniques. My good friend Eddie Bravo is a world famous jiu-jitsu instructor. He's always comparing it to tying your shoe. And he said, do you know how like when you were a little kid and you're trying to figure out how to tie your shoe, it's an extremely difficult thing to do. You're like, how do I do this? And you put that down, you do loops. Like I'm watching my 7-year-old daughter go through that right now. But now, as a grown man, when I tie my shoe, I could just be talking, what? Oh yeah, we're gonna go tomorrow, and I'll do it. I don't even know what I did. If you tried to ask me to explain how I tie my shoe, I'd be like, how do I tie my shoe? Like I don't even know how I do it because I have it in there. And the idea with martial arts is you've got to all of your techniques have to be automatic. Someone extends the arm, you instantly hook it and go into the arm bar. You have to have these paths like so drilled in that you don't even know you're doing them until it's over.
Yeah. So automaticity is one of the things that sleep actually accomplishes. I was talking about those 20 to 30% benefits in motor skill performance. So we did some additional studies to actually say, well, how does sleep do that? Where in your skill performance does sleep give you the benefit? So you're right, tying a shoelace, even driving a car with stick. At first it's just overwhelming. It's so difficult. It's clutch, it's gas pedal, it's gear. And now it's just second nature. It's shifted from conscious to automatic, from conscious to non-conscious. If you look at performance that is conscious and not automatic, it's usually very staccato. It's this, then it's that, then it's that. It's not fluid. If you heard someone trying to sort of play the piano to begin with, it doesn't sound very fluid. As someone who's a maestro, it just flows out of them. So we looked at this with motor skill performance, again, sort of like keyboard playing, musicianship, and you learn and you get better. And let's say that you type a sequence, let's say 4-1-3-2-4, and people learn it, but they have these problem points throughout the sequence. They go 4-1-3-2-4, 4-1-3-2-4, as if there's a sticking point. It's the same thing with any skilled performance in athletics. And it's the brain chunking things up. A very long motor sequence gets chunked up into small, sort of digestible bites. It's a good way to begin learning, but it's not a way to create automaticity. At some point, what you have to do is stitch all of those things together, and it just flows.
Like a sentence.
Like a sentence, yeah. Like a piano piece, like, a sequence of movements. If you've got, in martial arts, you've got,
Yeah.
So what we found was that before sleep, you've got these big problem points, these gaps in your motor skill learning. Sleep does not necessarily improve the places where you're already good. Sleep is intelligent. It goes in, finds that problem point, that friction point in your motor skill sort of deficit, and it smooths it out. So you come back the next day, and now it's just 4, 1, 3, 2, 4, 4, 1, 3, 2, 4, 4, 1, 3. It's automaticity, and it's exactly what you're describing. Speak to musicians, they'll say, I was playing, I just couldn't get that piece the night before. And then I came back the next day and I sat down and I could just play. Sleep's doing its work.
I've heard that too with problems, and that's why people say sleep on it.
Yeah. Yeah, you've never been told to stay awake on a problem.
Yeah, it's true, right? I mean, sometimes when you're about to go to bed, it's almost overwhelming. You just can't concentrate on anything else but this problem, whatever it is. And then you go to sleep and you wake up in the morning like, it's all right.
Yeah.
It's going to be fine.
Yeah.
I got it. I know what to do.
And sleep sort of, and there's lots of anecdotal evidence of sleep-inspired creativity. And now this shifts to one of the benefits of dreaming, in fact. It's during dream sleep when we take all of the information that we've previously learned and we start to collide it with all of the new information that we've learned. It's it's a little bit like group therapy for memories. Everyone gets a name badge and you all get to speak to each other. And the brain starts to seek out and test novel connections and new associations. So it's almost like informational alchemy. And you wake up the next morning with a revised mind-wide web that is now capable of divining, incredible solutions to previously impenetrable problems. And lots of anecdotes, Dmitry Mendeleev came up with a periodic table of elements by way of dream-inspired insight. Talk about a Herculean task. Take all of the elements in the known universe and figure out a structure as to how they all fit together. Off you go. His waking brain could not do it. His sleeping brain solved the problem. Whoa. Einstein, by the way, this is great. Einstein was suggested to be a short sleeper, and we don't know if that's true, but even if he was a habitual napper during the day. I've got some great pictures of him on his workbench, and he used sleep ruthlessly as a tool for creativity. And he would sit at his desk and he would have a sort of pad of paper and a pencil, and he had a chair with armrests, and he would pick up 2 steel ball bearings and take a metal saucepan and turn it upside down, place it underneath the arm of the chair, and put the 2 steel ball bearings in his hand. Then he would rest back and he would start to fall asleep. And so he didn't fall too far into sleep. What would happen is at some point, his muscle tone would relax. They would release the steel ball bearings. They would crash on the saucepan, wake him up, and then he would write down all of the creative ideas that he was having. Isn't that brilliant?
Are you fucking kidding
no
me?
wonder, you're never told to sort of stay awake on a problem. And in every language that I've inquired about today, French, Swahili, that phrase, sleeping on a problem, seems to exist, which must mean that this benefit of dream sleep transcends cultural boundaries. I should note, I think it's important that the French translation is much closer to you sleep with a problem. We, the British, you say you sleep on a problem. The French, you say you sleep with a problem. I think it says so much about the romantic difference between the British and the French,
Yeah, the French trying to fuck everything. They're trying to fuck their problems.
I'll lose my British passport and say that, but that's okay.
Well, I will, but I won't either. It's just a joke. That's fascinating that Einstein figured that out too, that he literally had like a whole routine that he would drop this ball and hit it, bang, wake up and start writing. Like,
self-medicating.
I would love to be in the room watching Einstein do that. It must have been fascinating.
Oh, sorry, I said Einstein. It's Edison. My goodness, I'm an idiot. Edison.
Oh,
sorry,
okay, that changes everything.
That's probably
wasn't Edison a thief though? Didn't he steal everything from Tesla?
I think there's
Stole a lot of
arguments to be
shit.
made, but I mean, he has a lot to answer for, by the way, in terms of the way that we're sleeping. You know, he was the first person to electrify society,
Right.
not necessarily create the light bulb, but he really, you know, shifted us from a point where now we controlled the night in terms of illumination. And we are a dark deprived society in this modern era. And that's one of the things that is keeping us awake at night, a lack of darkness.
Yeah, not just that, but also our inability to see the stars anymore. The light pollution that we have at night. I think it's a giant shift in perspective. Like, have you ever been to a planetarium or an observatory, like one of those at night? There's a Keck Observatory in Hawaii. It's a place I try to go to every year. And it's really stunning because it's very high up. I think the observatory it's somewhere more than 9,000 feet above sea level, and then I think you go even further, and then they have the telescopes. But you go to visitor center, and they have some telescopes set up. But you'd actually drive through the clouds. So as you're driving up this mountain, we were bummed out. We're like, oh, it's cloudy. We might not be able to see anything. And then you drive through the clouds. And then when you get through the clouds, you're like, holy shit. And you feel like you're on a spaceship flying through space. And this is what our ancestors saw every night when they went to sleep with a clear sky. They saw all the stars. They saw the full Milky Way like this. And the way the Big Island has set up, they use diffused lighting all over the island because of the Keck Observatory. So you don't have the same level of light pollution that you have when you're in a normal city like Los Angeles, which is terrible. I mean, LA, if you look up, you see like 1 or 2 stars because everything's lit up. It's crazy bright. I think that perspective that's a giant factor in the way human beings look at their relationship with the universe. But I think that also just the light everywhere, constant light everywhere, that's got to be a big factor in why people sleep so little, right?
Yeah, we know it is now. I mean, these studies have been done. You know, the first part is the external light, which is, you know, street lighting. You know, even if you've got curtains, that can still bleed through.
Yeah.
But then when you come into the home, you know, the invasion of light into the home by way of technology has been a big problem.
People looking at their phones before they go to bed.
Well, firstly, yeah, I mean, the incandescent light bulb sort of was the start of it. And light bulbs can suppress a hormone that's called melatonin. It's the hormone of darkness, and it tells your brain when it's dark and when it's time to sleep. But then you add into that screen usage, and they've done studies where, for example, 1 hour of iPad reading versus just 1 hour of reading on a book, you know, in dim light. That 1 hour of iPad reading firstly delayed the release of this critical darkness hormone called melatonin by about 3 hours. So if you read on your iPad for an hour here in California, your melatonin peak is not going to arrive. I mean, somewhere in Hawaii time, in fact, it's 3 hours delayed. It's 50% less in terms of its peak. And furthermore, you don't get the same amount of REM sleep. And when you wake up the next morning, you don't feel as refreshed or restored by your sleep. Those studies have been done too.
Wow. What should someone do if they have a hard time sleeping? Like, say if you're a person who has insomnia, you have a hard time getting to bed, you have a hard time staying asleep. When you wake up, you can't go back to bed.
Yeah.
Are there strategies?
There are. I mean, I think for most people, there are 5 things that you can do just out the gate to get better sleep. Regularity is probably the most important thing I can tell you. Go to bed at the same time, wake up at the same time, no matter whether it's the weekend, weekday. Regularity is key. We've spoken about light. For example, when you, in the last hour before bed, try to stay away from screens, but also just switch off half the lights in the house. You'd be surprised at how soporific that is. It really starts to sort of make you feel a bit more drowsy. They've done some great studies where they would take people out, you know, into the Rockies, no electric light, no electricity whatsoever. And they started to go to bed 2 hours earlier than their acclaimed natural bedtime. It wasn't just because they didn't have anything necessarily to do. It was that their melatonin was rising, 2 hours earlier. So keep it dark. The third is probably keep it cool. Your brain actually needs to drop its temperature by about 2 to 3 degrees Fahrenheit to initiate sleep. And that's the reason that you will always find it easier to fall asleep in a room that's too cold than too hot.
I've seen people use cold pads.
Yeah.
Have you seen those? You sleep on these cold pads. What do you think of those?
Yeah, I mean, the evidence is pretty good that cooling the body actually works. They've, in the book, I write about a series of studies where they had people in, it's almost like a wetsuit, but it has all of these veins running through it. And they could actually perfuse warm or cold water into any part of the body, hands, core of the body, feet. And so that you could exquisitely manipulate the temperature of any part of the body. And what they found is that they could effectively cool the body down, and it instantaneously made people fall asleep faster, and it gave them deep non-REM sleep, that sort of restorative sleep for the body.
Oh.
So, and you can even look at studies where people sleep semi-naked, and that also seems to improve their sleep, and they get a little bit more deep sleep too. So cold is better. The paradox here, though, is that you need to warm your feet and your hands to kind of charm the blood away from your core out to the surface and radiate that heat.
Really?
So
you should go to sleep with socks and gloves on?
Yeah. Or better still, have a hot bath. Evidence here, too, that I discussed where people say, I get out of a hot bath, I feel nice and toasty and relaxed, and that's why I fall asleep. It's the opposite. When you get into a bath, you get vasodilation, you sort of get rosy cheeks, red skin, all of the blood rushes to the surface. You get out of the bath and you have this massive thermal dump of heat that just evacuates from the body. Your core body temperature plummets, and that's why you sleep better. So you can hack the system very easily.
Wow.
That's why I like to wash my
your body
feet.
temperature plummets, and that's what makes you sleep easier.
Yeah.
That sounds so counterintuitive.
Yeah.
But it makes sense.
And it makes sense because that's how we were designed. If you look at hunter-gatherer tribes whose way of life has not changed for thousands of years, and you ask how do they sleep, one of the things that seems to dictate their sleep is the rise and fall of temperature. Temperature is at its lowest in the nadir of the night, 3 or 4 in the morning. And as that temperature, that climate temperature starts to drop, that's when they start to get drowsy, as if temperature is just sort of signaling to the brain, now it's time to sleep. So light as well as temperature are 2 key triggers to help you get better sleep. If you look at those tribes, by the way, and when they go to sleep and they wake up, they go to sleep probably at 2 hours after dusk, sort of 8 to 9 in the evening, wake up about half an hour, even an hour before dawn. It's the rise in temperature rather than light that triggers their awakening. But there's a reason, have you ever thought about what the term midnight actually means? Middle of the night.
Right.
And that's what it should be for all of us. But in modernity, we've been dislocated from our natural rhythms. And now midnight has become the time when we think, I should check Facebook last time, I should send my last email.
Yeah.
That is not how we were, designed to sleep. And in fact, we may also be designed to sleep biphasically too. If you look at those hunter-gatherers, they don't sleep one long bout of 8 hours at night.
Yeah, I've heard this recently, that you should have 2 sleeps. The idea of 2 sleeps.
Yeah, it's actually a little different than the idea of 2 sleeps. So there was a time in sort of the Dickensian era where people would sleep for the first half of the night, maybe sort of 4 hours or so. Then they would wake up, they would socialize, they would eat, they would make love, and then they would go back and have a second sleep. If you look at natural biological rhythms in the brain and the body, that doesn't really seem to be how we were designed. It certainly seems to be something that we did in society, but I think it's more of a societal trend than it was a biological edict. However, we do seem to have 2 sleep periods the way that we were designed. Those tribes will often sleep about 6.5 hours, 7 hours of sleep at night. And then especially in the summer, they'll have that siesta-like behavior in the afternoon. And all of us have that. Sort of this, what's called the postprandial dip in alertness, just means after lunch. And if I measure your brainwave activity with electrodes, I can see a drop in your physiological alertness somewhere between 2 to 4 p.m. in the afternoon.
But is that dependent on diet?
It's not. People think it is, especially after they've had a heavy lunch.
Yeah.
You can actually just have people fast and sort of, fasting for long periods of time actually makes your sleep much worse. But You can have people abstain from lunch and you still get that drop. So it's independent food. It's a genetically hardwired, pre-programmed drop that suggests we should be sleeping biphasically.
But is that dependent upon their standard diet? Because if someone is on a carbohydrate-rich diet, a lot of times you do get that spike and then you crash. But when people are on low-carb and high-fat diets, they don't get that, and they tend to be more even with their energy through the day.
Yeah. So yeah, that sort of more constant release of energy can actually help you sort of almost combat that lull.
But that lull exists no matter what.
Exactly.
So even if you don't think it exists, it's there.
It's still present.
Interesting. Yeah. So why did they do that in the Dickens era? Why did they? What is there a root cause of their double sleep thing?
We don't know. I mean, it's hard to sort of really go back.
Fascinating.
Yeah,
that was a trend.
Yeah, that it was a movement.
That they would just wake up and do things and
yeah.
Maybe it's because they didn't have TV. They didn't know what to do with themselves.
Yeah. Sounds like they did some pretty interesting things, which were nice. But
yeah. Well, they created a lot of art then too, right? A lot of writing, and a lot of fascinating stuff came out of that time. Now, when you're when you're measuring people's health, and when you're measuring people's health in regard to how much sleep they have, like how do you do that? Do you just talk to people? Do you do surveys? Like, how do you get like a detailed analysis of people's patterns?
So you can do it at many different levels. I mean, we can start at the sort of gross high level, which is epidemiological studies across millions of people, where you do surveys, you ask them about their sleep, and then you look at health outcomes. The first thing from that data that's clear is an unfortunate truth. The shorter your sleep, the shorter your life.
Wow.
Short sleep predicts all-cause mortality.
Which is really ironic because people that want to sleep less are like, I don't have a whole lot of time. Yeah. This life is short. Well, it's fucking shorter if you sleep less.
Yeah, that old maxim, you can sleep when you're dead.
Yeah.
Well, it's mortally unwise advice because we know from the data you will be both dead sooner and the quality of that now shorter life will be significantly worse.
Yeah, that's counterintuitive to people. The idea that you need this, it's not just like you're making best use of time by sleeping less. You're not. You would make best use of time by being awake less.
Exactly.
Which is crazy.
I mean, wakefulness, firstly, from a brain perspective, is low-level brain damage. We know that.
Wakefulness is?
Yeah.
Low, like right now, you and I are getting low-level brain damage.
Yeah, that's right. And it's sleep that offers a reparatory function.
Wow.
And I'll give you one example, which is your risk for Alzheimer's disease. Insufficient sleep across the lifespan now seems to be one of the most significant lifestyle factors determining whether or not you'll develop Alzheimer's.
What studies, or if any, have been done on people that work third shift?
So people have looked at shift work in general. They haven't necessarily split it down to that granular point, but what we see is that shift workers have higher rates of obesity, higher rates of diabetes, but perhaps most frighteningly, cancer. And in fact, we now know the link between a lack of sleep and cancer is quite strong. Insufficient sleep is linked to cancer of the bowel, cancer of the prostate, cancer of the breast. And the association has become so powerful that recently the World Health Organization decided to classify any form of nighttime shift work as a probable carcinogen.
Whoa!
Yeah, so jobs that may induce cancer because of a disruption of your sleep rhythms.
Are there other correlating factors? Like, don't people that sleep less or work into the night, don't they eat more and eat more shitty food?
They do, both of those things. Yeah, and we know exactly the pathways. So there are two hormones that control your appetite and your weight. One is called leptin, the other is called ghrelin. They sound like hobbits, but they're not the real hormone, the real chemicals.
They do sound like hobbits.
Yeah, it's bizarre. But, so leptin is the chemical that tells your brain you're full, you're satiated, you don't want to eat anymore. Ghrelin does the opposite. It's the hunger hormone. It says you want to eat more, you're not satisfied with your food. If I take people, and these studies have been done, we've done some of these studies too, and you just put a group of healthy people on 4 or 5 hours of sleep for, let's say, 1 week, and you look at those two hormones, they go in unfortunately opposite directions. So leptin, that says you're full, stop eating, that gets suppressed by a lack of sleep. Ghrelin, the hunger hormone, that gets ramped up. So firstly, people who are sleeping just 5 to 6 hours a night will on average eat somewhere between 200 to 300 extra calories each day. because of the underslept state.
Oh,
Add
look.
that up, it's about 70,000 extra calories a
over there.
year.
I
It's
don't
about
see
10
you
to
watching
15
me.
pounds of
You're
obese
watching
mass
me.
each year, which
I see you
for
watching
me is
me.
starting to sound familiar. But
Come,
what we also
come,
know
come,
is that
goodies,
it's
come.
not just that when you're underslept, you eat more. You eat more of the wrong things. So the great scientific work, if you give people this sort of finger buffet and they can eat whatever they want and it contains all of the different food groups, and you sleep deprive them or you give them a full 8 hours of sleep, yes, they start to overeat by somewhere around about 450 calories with total sleep deprivation. But what they go after is heavy hitting carbohydrates and simple sugars, processed food. And they stay away from the healthy sort of leafy greens, nuts, proteins, etc. So you're not just eating more, you're eating more of the wrong things. And that's why a lack of sleep has such a strong obesogenic profile to it. And you can take a step back too, and you say, well, if you look at the rise of obesity over the past 70 years, it's just this upward exponential increase. And if you plot on the same graph the amount of sleep that society is getting, it goes in the opposite direction. As sleep time has declined, obesity rates have increased. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that the obesity epidemic is simply a sleep problem. It's not. It's a problem of us being sedentary, processed foods, larger food serving sizes. If you take those factors, though, by themselves, they cannot explain the increase in obesity. Other things are at play. Is sleep one of them? Now we know it is. It's a critical factor in the obesogenic epidemic.
I know from personal experience, when I'm tired, I always gravitate towards the worst choices. For me, it's late night cheeseburgers.
Yeah.
Wendy's at 2:00 in the morning or whatever. What happens if you get naps? Like, say if you only have 5 hours of sleep, but you take a 2-hour nap during the day, does everything make up?
Yes and no. So what you're talking about there is what we call prophylactic
I can't.
napping, which is sort of strategically trying to help combat your deficiency of sleep. Naps can actually give you benefits. We've done some of these studies where they improve, your learning, your memory, your alertness, your concentration, especially your emotional regulation too. Sleep is critical for emotional first aid and mental health. However, you can't keep using naps to self-medicate sort of short sleep of 4 or 5 hours each night. We know that the system itself, your brain, has no capacity to regain all of the sleep that it's lost. It will try to sleep back some of that debt. But what we've discovered, let's say I take you tonight, I deprive you of sleep, 8 hours lost. Then I give you all of the recovery sleep that you want on a second, third, or fourth night. You will sleep longer, but you will only get back maybe just 3 or 4 hours of that lost
So I'm never going to win.
So sleep is not like the bank. You can't accumulate a debt and then hope to pay it off at the weekend. And so there is no credit system within the brain for sleep. You can't bank it, which is odd, by the way. I would love that system.
Then you would know what you owed.
You would know what you owed, but I could also just know when I'm going into a state of sleep debt, and I could build up some credit. And there's precedent for this, by the way. There is a system like that in the brain. It's called the fat cell, because there were times during our evolutionary past where we faced famine and we faced feast. And so the body learned to adapt to that. So when you have feast, store it up as caloric energy in these things called adipose cells, fat cells. And then when you go into famine, you can spend that caloric credit. Where is that in the brain? Why don't we have that? The reason is very simple. Human beings are the only species that deliberately deprive themselves of sleep for no apparent reason. In other words, Mother Nature has never faced the challenge of coming up with a safety net for a lack of sleep. We've never been forced to come up with that solution. That's why we get such demonstrable disease, sickness, and impairment when you undergo a lack of sleep.
So this is a recent occurrence in human beings, is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I mean, the only time we see it in nature is when you go into conditions of starvation. The only way that you can get a species to sleep less, and it's very, very difficult to do because sleep is just so essential, is when you put them under conditions of extreme starvation. There they will forego some sleep to stay awake so that they forage in a larger sort of circumference area to try and find more food. it's probably the reason that by fasting, their sleep is so terrible, because the brain is receiving this ancient trigger that you're going without food. You're in a state of starvation. You need to stay awake and hunt for food. That's why your sleep gets so much worse when you're undergoing fasting.
That's fascinating. I did not know that. So fasting is when you're talking about multiple day fasting and not intermittent fasting.
We don't know the evidence for intermittent fasting. So, if some people are doing sort of 12 hours, 14 hours, 16 hours, that doesn't seem to be extreme enough to trigger a change in sleep. But if you fast for these long periods, 2 days, 3 days, 4 days, you can really see some quite marked sleep fragmentation. Sleep is, ask any of those people, they'll tell you.
That's fascinating because people always cite the health benefits of multiple day fasts. Do you think that that's just like a placebo effect?
Certainly we know that there are chemical pathways that when you go into fasting are activated that seem to be beneficial for health outcomes. And there's a big literature on sort of fasting and aging, the mTOR pathway, for example. But we also know that as a species, we were not designed to have such terrible fragmented sleep. And we spoke about how sleep regulates your appetite.
Right.
If you're trying not to eat food and sort of control and manage your weight, the last thing that you probably want to do is be shortchanging yourself on sleep, because it's only going to make you even more hungry and reach for sort of worse food. So I still think there's room for fasting in the equation, but I think those extreme fasts, and the havoc that it plays on sleep, it's still yet to be understood. You've got to be very careful with playing around with anything going beyond sensible, behavior.
So what does it? Like, what is, if you're going to fast for 2 days, what switches on that forces your body into this haphazard sleep program?
So that's where that hormone ghrelin just kicks into high gear. That hormone that is just saying, it's a starvation hormone at that point. It's not just a hunger hormone. You've gone over into starvation. And that will promote alertness. It promotes chemicals that try to keep you awake, chemicals like dopamine to sort of force you wide awake.
So it's forcing you to go hunt or gather.
That's right. Yeah.
And this is even if your body goes into a state of ketosis.
That we don't know. People have not tried to correlate sort of the profile change in ketosis versus alterations in sleep. I actually think it would be fascinating. Maybe there's a peak where it's bad, and then you crest it, and then things get better. Does the body acclimate to that? I don't know. We've never seen the body being able to sort of re-engage with cognitive function with a dose of sleep deprivation that keeps going. So and these studies have been done, take people and give them 2 weeks of 7 hours of sleep, 5 hours of sleep, 3 hours of sleep, or no sleep. Even by sort of 7 days or even 14 days of 6 hours of sleep, your cognitive performance just knows that it's like a dart into the ground. And it doesn't show any signs of leveling off, as if there is no asymptote that it could keep going. And by the way, people should know that after 20 hours of being awake, you are as impaired cognitively as you would be if you were legally drunk.
Wow. What about physical movement?
Same thing. Yeah, in terms of your alertness and reaction time. But it's worse, and this is where drowsy driving comes in. For every 30 seconds that we've been speaking, there has been a car accident linked to sleeplessness. Drowsy driving, it seems, kills more people on the roads than either alcohol or drugs combined.
Whoa.
Why are drowsy driving accidents so deathly? Now, I'm not endorsing those other things, of course not, but let's just think about why that's the case. Okay. When you're underslept, you start to have what are called micro sleeps. Sometimes your eyelid does not close all the way, it just partially closes, but the brain essentially goes to sleep for just a very brief period of time. You can even see individual brain cells, looks like they go to sleep during these micro sleeps. At that moment, if you're traveling in a vehicle on the freeway, you've got a 1-ton missile traveling at 65 miles an hour and no one is in control.
1 ton if you're lucky.
Yeah.
Exactly. When's the last time you saw a 2,000-pound car, unless you have a Miata?
Or a McLaren P1. But if you are,
even those are heavier than that.
Are they really?
Yeah.
It's just my lack of knowledge, despite living them. I think, and what happens here is that with drugs and alcohol, it's often the case of a problem of later reaction. With a lack of sleep, it's a problem of no reaction at all.
So you're out of it.
So you're
Right.
out of it. So rather than braking too late, there's just no braking whatsoever.
Yeah,
That's
I have
why.
a tip for people too. If you find yourself cold or tired and driving and you have to stay awake, take either ice or ice cold water and put it in a washcloth, and then rub your face with it. It keeps you awake.
Works.
Yeah, it works. I mean, if you're forced to drive for whatever reason, you have to, you have 20 minutes to go and you're really exhausted, do that. Ice is the best. Take a wet cloth, put ice inside of it, and just rub your face. It just wakes you right up for whatever reason.
And the statistics around drowsy driving though, are frightening. And
it's a weird thing when you're on the road. There's something about those white lines that just want to put you to sleep. There's no other time where I feel more compelled to just conk out while I'm awake.
Yeah, it's probably one of the greatest sedatives known to man. It's that monotonous, behavior.
Yeah.
And the longer you go with that monotony, the worse things get. And if you look at teenagers, that's where we see some of the greatest impact of drowsy driving. It's the leading cause of death in most first world nations. Suicide is second.
Wow, that is crazy.
And it speaks to this, in this model of later school start times. They've done these studies. There was a great one that was done, I think, in Teton County in Wyoming. They shifted their school start times from 7:35 in the morning to 8:55 in the morning, much more biologically reasonable for teenagers. The only thing more impressive than the extra hour of sleep that those teenagers reported getting was the drop in vehicle accidents. There was a 70% reduction in car crashes the following year when they made that time. 7-0.
Holy
so
shit.
The advent of ABS technology, for example, anti-lock brake systems, that dropped accident rates by 20 to 25%. Some deemed it to be a revolution. Here's a simple biological factor, sleep, that will drop accident rates by 70%. So I think if our goal as educators truly is to educate, and we've spoken about learning and memory, and not risk lives in the process, then we are failing our children in the most spectacular manner with this incessant model of early school start times.
Why do we do that? Like what? And not just early school times, but early work times too. I was driving to the airport the other day at 6 a.m. 6 a.m. bumper to bumper traffic on the 405. I was like, this is insane. Look at these poor fucks.
What are we doing? And if you're in the car at 6 a.m. there, it means that you probably woke up, 5, 4.
Yeah. 4:30.
Average school start times in the US, some of them, 7:25. Buses for a school start time of 7:25 will begin leaving at 5:30 in the morning. That means that some kids are having to wake up at 5:15, 5 o'clock, maybe even earlier. It's just lunacy.
It is lunacy. And why do they do that? I mean, it's just a pattern that they've always done, and they never corrected it.
Yeah, it's a pattern that actually has changed over the past 30 or 40 years. I mean, American schools used to start around 9 o'clock, and it started to shift ever and ever earlier.
Why?
Part of it is because of work times, that parents had to get to work at ever earlier
So they drop
start
the kids
times.
off before
So you drop
work.
the kid, yeah. And then bus unions and bus schools, they complied to that same time frame as well. And it becomes very difficult, and I don't mean to chastise school systems or the bus unions. It's an incredibly difficult logistics problem. But I have to think that, what is our goal here? Our goal is to keep our kids safe and to get them well educated, and get information into the brain and nurture them, and, create them to be the next generation. Early school start times, are not the thing to do.
There's a lot of lazy kids out there that are going, yes.
Yeah. Well,
preach on, doctor, preach.
I mean, the data, they looked at these academic things too. One of these, another example comes from Adena in Minnesota, and they shifted school start times from, I think it was 7:25 to 8:30 in the morning. And they looked at SAT scores. And in the year before they made the time change, the top 10% performing students got an average SAT score of 1,288, which is a great score. The following year, when they were going to school now at 8:30 rather than 7:25, the average SAT score was 1,500. That's a 212-point increase, which is non-trivial.
Wow, that's gigantic.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's the school time in correlation with the work time.
Yeah.
It's very difficult to get people off of that.
Yeah, and that's part of what, modernity has done. We're working longer hours, and also we're commuting for longer durations of time. So therefore, people having to wake up earlier, they come home later, and the one thing that gets squeezed, sort of like vice grips, is this thing called sleep. And the decimation of sleep throughout industrialized nations as a consequence is having a catastrophic impact on our health and our wellness and the safety and the education of our children. Silent sleep loss epidemic.
Wow. Now, other than making the room cold and warming up your hands and your feet and things along those lines, what about diet? Is it, or even time that you eat? Is there a specific time before you go to bed that you should eat? How much time should you give yourself to digest your food?
So the general advice right now is don't go to bed too full and don't go to bed too hungry. Again, if you're going to bed too hungry, you can get that sort of that signal of I'm starting to go into low level sort of starvation, and that can keep people awake at night. The evidence in terms of diet composition and sleep is quite unclear. It's not a particularly well-researched area right now. What we do know is that diets that are high in sugar and sort of heavier starchy carbohydrates and low in fiber, those diets tend not to be good for sleep. You tend to have less deep sleep, and your sleep is also more fragmented throughout the night. So that's sort of right now the best advice.
So you should eat several hours before you go to bed, but not 5 hours.
That's right. Yeah.
Like 2 hours maybe.
And it's different for different people, and you will know it, if you're sort of starting to wake up with really severe hunger pangs.
What about supplements, like melatonin supplements or things along those lines?
Melatonin is efficacious. It's useful when you're traveling between time zones. So at that point, your body clock, your internal clock is out of sync with the actual real time in the new time zone. And let's say I fly from Los Angeles over to London, back home. My melatonin spike is going to be 8 hours in the past, it's sort of back in time. It's not going to arrive with me for 8 hours. So I can take some melatonin and I can fool my brain into thinking, oh my goodness, it's actually dark, when despite in California, it's still daylight once I've arrived at Heathrow Airport. So you can use melatonin strategically for jet lag. Once people, however, are stable in a new time zone, melatonin does not seem to be efficacious for helping sleep. That said, though, if people out there are taking melatonin and they think it helps, I would tell them to keep taking it, because the placebo effect is the most reliable effect in all of pharmacology. So if it works for you, no harm, no foul, keep taking it.
Interesting. So the people that take melatonin nightly, they're like, this is what gets me to go to bed. Really, they're just playing a trick on their mind.
Yeah, unless you're an older individual where your sort of 24-hour rhythm, it's called your circadian rhythm, starts to get blunted and it's not as strong anymore. That's where nightly use of melatonin actually has been demonstrated to be efficacious. But if you're young, healthy, and you're taking melatonin, it's unlikely that it's actually helping us sleep. That's probably the placebo.
So it really should just be just for travel.
Yeah.
Or weird situations where your sleep is interrupted.
That's right.
And you need to kick it into gear.
Bring it back on.
Interesting. So it's almost like a hack. Like
it's definitely, that's one way that you can hack jet lag. I mean, there's no cure for jet lag, but there's actually lots of ways that you can hack jet lag.
Are there any other vitamins or nutrients or particular foods that enhance the sleepy effect? I mean, there was always the thing about tryptophan. Everybody thought the tryptophan was in turkey.
Yeah.
But what I read was that was bullshit. And what was really going on was that you just ate a gigantic meal and it's filled with stuffing and mashed potatoes, and all those carbohydrates cause you to just crash.
And it's usually, it's the time when everyone goes back through into sort of the living room, you lie down. Most people are chronically sleep deprived.
Right.
And finally you get the opportunity to sort of just rest, and no one's doing anything because there's no plans.
What do you think the numbers are of sleep deprived people in this country?
So we know those numbers actually. Almost 1 out of every 2 adults in America are not getting the recommended 8 hours of sleep. Almost 1 out of every 3 people that you pass on the street are trying to survive on 6 hours or less of sleep. Back in 1942, Gallup did a poll, and what they found was that the average American adult was sleeping 7.9 hours of sleep a night. Now that number, most recently, is down to 6 hours and 31 minutes for the average adult during the week. That's the average, by the way. That means that there's a huge swath of people well below that average.
Now, what about the people that say that they sleep, they go to bed, they sleep 5 hours, they wake up, they feel great?
20 minutes.
Is that bullshit?
That was in 20 minutes.
We have,
Damn it.
the number of people who can survive on 6 hours of sleep or less without showing any impairment, rounded to a whole number and expressed as a percent of the population is 0.
Oh, fuck.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow, 0.
And one of the big problems with a lack of sleep, by the way, is that you don't know you're sleep deprived when you're sleep deprived. So your subjective sense of how well you're doing with a lack of sleep is a miserable predictor of objectively how you're doing. So it's like a drunk driver.
Men, right?
Yeah,
Right.
Especially, perfect example. You know, you're at the bar, you've had 6 or 7 shots, and you say, I can drive home, I'm fine. And your response is, I know that you think you're fine to drive subjectively, objectively, trust me, you're not. It's the same way with sleep deprivation.
That's fascinating. So, but you're not drunk. So even though you're impaired, you don't feel like you're impaired. You just, and you probably have a couple of espressos or
and we're gonna have
caveman coffees. You feel fine, right? You get juiced up. You're ready to go, and you're trying to accomplish things. You're trying to succeed, right? You're trying to get ahead in this life.
Yeah,
I don't need to sleep.
And it's, you know, that's completely counterintuitive based on the data. We know that people are more productive.
10-second
You
delay from
know,
our
and
lives.
we've done some of these studies in the workplace where you look, firstly, underslept employees will take on fewer work challenges overall. They end up taking the simple ones like listening to voice messages rather than actually digging into deep project work. They produce fewer creative solutions to challenges that you give them. They also slack off when they're working in groups. It's called social loafing, where they just ride the coattails of other people's hard work. The less sleep that you have, the more willing that you just sort of don't pull your weight. Furthermore, it goes all the way up to the top. So the more or less sleep that a business leader has had from one night to the next, the more or less charismatic their employees will rate that business leader, despite them knowing nothing about the sleep of that CEO. It's evident in their behavior.
Well, because they're short with the, you know, they're short with their temper, they're quicker to get upset about things, they're less charismatic and social with their conversations. They're just more, okay, I got it. Go to work.
Work for it. You know, so less sleep does not equal more productivity. And it's always struck me as strange, you know, why do we sort of overvalue employees that undervalue sleep? And if you look at your workforce, you know, trust me, everyone's going to be looking busy, but it's like stationary bikes. Everyone's looking like they're working hard, but there's no forward progress. The scenery never changes. That's what an underslept workforce will do.
Now, what about the amount of time people spend at work? I know this is not related to sleep, but I've always felt like people work too much. I feel like you probably get more done with less time there.
Yeah, so efficiency is what we're talking about here, and that's another one of those things with sleep deprivation. And I think many people, when they haven't had a good night of sleep, they're looking at this report and they realize, geez, I've just read this paragraph a third time and I still can't quite get it.
Because your head's scrambled. Yeah.
Efficiency, you know, productivity.
But I would feel like when people are working 8 hours a day, I don't think that you can work at peak capacity for 8 hours. At least I don't think the average person can.
No, you can't sustain it.
Yeah. So you're kind of bleeding these people. You're getting blood out of a rock in the last couple hours.
And it's not, you know, either a creative way to work. In creativity, it's supposed to be the engine of ingenuity.
Good luck today. I'm glad I went in.
Take twice the amount of time to boil a pot of water on half heat when you could do it in half the time if you just put it on high. Well, that's,
you know what's interesting though? There are certain writers who use sleep deprivation as a strategy for creativity. They literally don't stop. They're writers for a sitcom on news radio.
Oh, there I am.
Writing until like 2, 3.
Oh, it's slowing down.
Play video games and fuck around.
Before it was 10
late at
seconds.
night, they just really start writing, and they would write till like 7 in the morning. They would stumble into the set like barefoot, delirious, hair all fucked up with hilarious scripts. And it's like they
So
had
if you go in
used
this
being
area,
silly and overtired as a strategy, almost like they were doing drugs.
yourself?
Right? They weren't doing any drugs.
I mean, it comes
The
back
camera's
to
there,
this.
so
Well,
it'd be
we
like-
don't know about that scenario because we speak, but what we have found at least.
Is there sound or just?
Yeah, there
that
is. Actually, I
prefrontal
sent you the
cortex
Yeah.
region that you spoke about before, that's the rational, logical
Mm.
part of the brain.
Yeah.
That's one of the first things to
How do
go
I
when
send
sleep
the link?
deprived. So if
Sent
that
you
area of
the
the
Oh, you
brain
sent
just
me,
gets
oh,
sort of
that's what that was.
switched off,
Oh,
That's
the more that you are sort of
Only you have the
lacking in
link.
sleep and
share
emotional
it
and
unless you
emotional
really, you
centers
know.
of the brain, which are normally controlled and kept in check by that prefrontal cortex, they just erupt in terms of their activity. So you're all emotional gas.
And
Why
because
don't you make
please
it
sit
a
down.
little, you know?
Yeah, but I want you to sit down in the chair because I have the ball here.
But, you know, one
And
possibility
the chair
is
goes
that
over
if you want to
there.
try and get a little bit sort of, you know,
We'll figure it out.
loosey-goosey, you know, maybe that's not
Yeah.
good for that type of sort of career writing, that you know, you become a bit more childlike.
That's okay.
And I say that affectionately because the last part of the brain to mature
But I
in
bought it
development
back,
is the prefrontal
Yes.
cortex.
Like,
So you
that's that
revert
baby,
back
man.
to almost a more childlike state. But I honestly would not
That's
condone
good.
that sort of, you know, undergoing sleep. Just based
Saw
on
bacon on
the
sale.
Ah.
risk of
Bacon.
Alzheimer's cancer
Well,
by
that's
itself.
good. I show my parents at work.
Sleep.
Even in short doses, like a couple days a week, like here's the, if sleep is not a renewable resource, like what is the effect of say
Right.
3 nights a week?
Could you
where
show
you
them
sleep
like
8
that?
hours,
They're all like,
and
bro,
then,
I
one
didn't
thing,
click
man,
on
what's
that.
happening?
Yeah, no, I didn't.
and then the next night 8 hours. How much of a bump?
So,
how much
but
of
in
a
theory, if you click
does
on
that
it, that's
2
the
hours
kitchen.
give you in your overall health?
Well, let's see,
It's
let's
bad.
see.
Well, that's what I'm trying to ask you to do.
Well, sorry, well, just say, Susan, can you open it up now?
Well, I just figured, why aren't you like interested?
And what they saw
Well, I was at
was
work,
a
so it's.
Oh, you don't know.
Yeah.
critical anti.
And you said LOL, so I just thought it was something funny to watch. I didn't know.
Okay, oh,
These are
I know, I would say.
immunosuppressants that target malignant cells. So today, both you and I
There's a
have
ton of
produced
delays.
cells in our body. What prevents those
You were there for like
cells
2
from becoming
seconds.
the disease that we call cancer is in part these natural killer cells.
What's this?
And after one night,
Oh, because we're going live.
remarkable
Turn your volume down.
efficiency, and that's one
Okay,
of the
hang on.
reasons why.
It's off, it's off.
Okay, you got volume down?
Yes, I
I
turned
can
it
also
off.
speak about the cardiovascular. All it takes is 1 hour.
5,
Because there's a
4,
global
3,
experiment.
Here you are moving the ball.
I'm not moving the ball here.
70
No, I mean, like,
There?
mine's from the
Daylight
beginning,
savings.
when you first turned it on.
Now, in the spring, when we
Wait a second.
You're saying something.
we see a subsequent 24% increase in heart
Where-
attacks.
Did you just lose the ball?
Yeah, but hold on.
Yeah, just
In
right
the
now.
autumn,
I don't have it yet. Hang on, where's the ball?
21%
Look over here, Susan.
There, I see you doing that.
Bidirectional.
Dude, Sasha.
That's how fragile.
Where's the ball over here?
Your body is to
Yeah,
even just
but the ball is in
smallest
my picture.
activation of sleep.
1 hour.
1 hour is
That's
all it takes.
insane.
Yeah.
Really?
Now I show you going to the table.
Guys, you're blowing my fucking mind.
Okay, what am I doing right
I mean,
now?
you can go even further.
Right
by
now
the way,
you just
yeah.
walked over here, now you're walking
Insufficient.
Oh,
back.
here we go. We got the
Now
ball.
you're
We got the
saying, what am I
ball.
doing right now?
Okay, there we go. There we go. Look, look, look,
Yeah,
look, look.
yeah.
Yeah, we're back in action.
Yeah.
Healthy adults.
So mine's
Back in
faster than
action.
yours.
Limited them to 6 hours.
Because I show you shaking your booty right now.
And they compared the profile of gene activity
I know, but
to whether they see people getting 8
you
hours
do that a
of
lot.
sleep. And there
It's
were
very
two
cute.
critical results.
Yeah.
The first was that a
Parents like
sizable
that.
set
Okay, are we
of
repeating
people
there? Like, what's going on?
were distorted in their activity. causing
Oh, I was trying to get
only
like,
6 hours
oh
of
wow, we're really behind.
which is
Yeah.
really relevant, by the
A
way,
minute
because we know
behind.
that many people are trying to survive on 6 hours of sleep during the week. The
Sorry.
second, sorry,
No, please go.
I was going to say the second sort of more interesting result was that about half of those increased in activity, the other half were actually suppressed. Those genes that were switched off by 6 hours of sleep for a week were genes related to your immune response, many of them. So you become immune deficient. Those genes that were increased or overexpressed were genes that were related to the promotion of tumors, genes that were related to long-term chronic inflammation within the body, and genes that were associated with stress and as a consequence cardiovascular disease.
This is unbelievable. You know what's really disturbing to me? In my youth, from age
In my youth.
probably, I guess I was probably
Okay, aggressive girl.
started. I delivered newspapers. I used to drive around and throw newspapers out of my car. And I did it for years. And I would have to be up 5 o'clock every morning. And I never never went to bed early.
Yeah.
Ever. And I worked 365 days a year.
How old were you?
I think I started
Holy shit, you know what? I took us to garbage
I
today.
started driving.
I had to go all the way goddamn street looking for an empty garbage can.
Oh my God, yeah.
And like, I'm wearing flip flops, and too. I'm just like,
Time job.
are you fucking serious? Because like, I'm not
My
gonna dump
senior
it.
year of high school or after, I think right after my senior year of high school. So it's probably 18.
Okay. And the reason I asked, by the way, is because as you go through into those sort of later stages of adolescence and sort of early adulthood, your biological rhythm moves forward in time. So you want to go to bed later and wake up later.
Yeah.
So even if you went to bed sort of conscientiously at that time, at let's say like 10 o'clock,
Isn't that
11 o'clock,
creepy?
you wouldn't be
Yeah.
able to sleep.
Especially
because
with
it's
Savine
biological
like that.
rhythm.
I know, it's just
No, I
like,
didn't
look at
see it.
yourself.
And then on Saturday, even worse, one day
It's
a week,
like
Saturday night.
me
I had
watching
to
you
get up
watching me.
3 or 4 in the morning
Ooh.
because I had to deliver Sunday papers, and the Sunday papers were enormous. And so I had to pack a van filled with 350 people that I would deliver papers to. So I had to do multiple trips. So I'd start work at, I'd start delivering somewhere around 4:35, depending on when the papers got in, and I was done by like 9, 9:30, and then I tried to crash, but I was a wreck.
Yeah.
I mean, and it fucked me up for years. For years I did that. And I stop and think about that now.
That
Listening
wasn't
to you,
just me.
listening to this
Yeah.
conversation, like what kind of fucking damage did I do to myself over those years?
And I won't tell you about the stuff with Alzheimer's then,
Uh-oh.
amyloid protein.
Oh.
I feel okay now. It's been several decades.
Did I mention that your subjective sense of how well you're doing with insufficient sleep is no?
Wow, I'm sure you did, and I'm sure that there's a factor there. What's stunning to me is that 6 hours is so detrimental. I would have thought that would have been fine. 6 hours is good. Like you get 6 hours, that's good. That's normal for me.
Yeah.
Like 6 hours is
Take your
normal.
vitamin D
Literally, the
today.
minimum is 7.
Pardon?
Yeah, 7
Yes,
to
you
9
did.
hours of sleep.
7.
Yes, I took 2.
Yeah.
Anything under 7 is bullshit.
Yeah, for the
You
average
really
adult,
should get 8.
there is a small fraction of 1% of the population that has a special gene that allows them to survive on about 5 hours of sleep. And most people, when I tell them this, they say,
I
I
must
think
have that.
I'm one of those people.
Yeah.
The chances of you being, you're much more likely, for example, to be struck by lightning in your lifetime, the odds of which are, I think, about 1 in 12,500, than you are to have this incredibly rare gene that means you can survive on something around 5 hours of sleep.
Really?
Yeah.
And what is the gene?
Well, it's a gene that seems to promote sort of, again, wakefulness chemistry within the brain that allows you to sort of maintain
Hungry?
wakefulness in a more sustained way.
Oh, you're not there.
And so we're only trying to understand right now what the actual
I'll leave it here,
biochemical
but-
mechanisms are in terms of the
Well, no,
consequence
I
of
tell you,
that
like,
gene, that
did you
gene
eat?
mutation. But certainly
didn't
it
eat.
seems to exist that there are
Okay.
some of those
I'm
quote
serving.
unquote short sleepers.
Okay.
By the
I
way,
need to
we hear of these
And I'll
business
eat with you.
leaders and even actually heads of state.
I also
I'm
have
not
a
going to
little
name any names, but I'll
cup
give
of
you
soup, that's
right
it.
now. But I'll give you 2 examples of the past. Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan both were vociferous in their statement and their declaration of how little sleep that they would get. Both of them said 4 or 5 hours a night. And I think in part it was to paint this heroic ironclad status.
Yeah.
And many people would say to me, Margaret Thatcher, she had a lifetime. Well, sadly and tragically, Thatcher and Reagan both ended up getting Alzheimer's disease. And we now know because of it's during deep sleep at night that there is a sewage system in the brain that kicks into high gear
Oh,
and it
I
cleanses
know,
the brain
it's
of all of the
creepy.
metabolic
Wait till you
enzymes
get
that
back up
have been
there.
built up throughout the day. This lower brain damage. One
Only
of
you
those
have the link
toxic
to me.
sticky proteins that build
No
up
one else
whilst
has the
we're awake is called beta amyloid. Beta amyloid is one of the
And
leading
eventually, if you
causes
want, we can
of
actually
underlying
like,
the
share.
mechanism of Alzheimer's disease. So the less
If you
sleep
want.
that you're having across the
Well, yeah, that's
lifespan,
We have to remember
more
this
of that toxic amyloid is building up night after night, year after year. And I don't think it's coincidental that both of them ended up progressing tragically into a state of Alzheimer's disease. So it's good night sleep clean in that way in terms of deep sleep.
That's
Critical.
stunning. That is
It's a lot of
stunning.
cranberries.
Is there anything you can do in terms of how you eat or supplements you can take that could potentially be somewhat mitigate effects of having no sleep?
We haven't found any good countermeasures.
Have you tried diet pills?
So people have tried things like ephedrine,
Amphetamines.
amphetamines.
Yeah.
Caffeine has been used strategically by the military for years. And caffeine can help you get over the basic reduction in your alertness, so basic response times. You can dose with caffeine and still maintain some degree of a fast response under conditions of sleep deprivation.
What about Provigil or Nuvigil? You studied
Yeah,
those
so
at all?
modafinil is sort of the underlying chemical there, and it's debated who actually came up with it. It may have been the French military who actually ended up being.
It was the Germans, you fool! The Germans! 999!
At least right now, has been for a chemical called dopamine. And dopamine is principally known as a pleasure drug. It's the chemical that a lot of drugs of abuse will target to sort of ramp up. But it also is a basic alertness drug that when you get an increase in dopamine, you tend to actually get an increase in your alertness, your wakefulness.
Don't you get an increase in happiness as
I
well?
almost got you can too, although modafinil tends to come with the alertness component of that equation and less so with the euphoria. That's why it has a lower prevalence of.
But I didn't know. I went over to the broad session.
Well, I know a lot of people, I wouldn't say they abuse it, but they say they have to use it. Like, oh, the doctor says they're going to use it. Yeah, I'm always suspicious because they seem pretty normal.
There were so many
other than
broths.
The fact that
I was just like,
they're exhausted.
I was just like, I can't do this.
What's essentially the name? I've taken it a few times.
Yeah, it's
I've
crazy.
taken it when I have to drive, like long periods of time. I go driving from San Diego, California to Los Angeles, and you have a gig.
We got broths coming.
At like
No wonder America is so divided.
late at night. I might take
Oh
one.
shit! This is
And,
actually
it's fine, but it gives you this weird feeling. It's a weird
with
state.
sound.
And I know a lot of tech people.
Yeah.
A lot of Silicon Valley is on this stuff, and they pop it like candy. So much so that Tim Ferriss, when he was writing his book, The 4 Hour Body, he included this particular drug because he felt like people were just going to eat it all the time.
Yeah, I mean, and it's right throughout the
This
student
is
populations. It's
Yes.
drug as well.
As
Adderall. Yeah, this big girl is hot as fuck.
One of the interesting
And
things
it's
is
hot
that
as
if you
fuck.
look at the profile of what's definitively, reduced alertness, impulsivity, lack of ability to concentrate, difficulties with learning and memory, difficulties with behavioral problems. If I were to describe those features to a pediatrician and say, what disorder is this? Let me say it's ADHD.
Yes.
But what we now know is that there is some portion of children out there who are diagnosed with ADHD who either one are just underslept or two actually have sleep disordered breathing because of perhaps tonsil problems where they're not getting sufficient sleep. And when you treat the sleep disorder, when you do sort of remove the tonsils, they start sleeping normally and the ADHD disappears. So there's an issue here I think, within that sort of the explosion of ADHD. Not all people are, sort of privy to this sort of sleep problem simply masquerading as ADHD. Some people are.
Well, there I am, big boots.
Hey, TikTok titties. Oh, what's something nice? Okay, can't do this shit.
Holy big tits.
It'll fuck you up. Stop watching. Look away, look away.
I want to see myself.
I know, but just look away because it gets weird. I just warned you, just saying.
I want to see me hug you and kiss. I'm pulling on bra straps. Okay, don't do that on camera.
I know, it's just nonstop. Now we're gonna put on some music for it. Oh, for God's sakes. Okay.
Upgrade your home.
I don't want to fucking upgrade my home. I want you to shut the fuck up.
Look at you, look at me. I'm surprised.
Stop it. It's gonna fuck you up, okay? It fucks me up all morning.
Look at I'm just like, what the fuck?
I look at who you look.
I'm not paying any attention.
No man turn 98. You won the lottery. Died the next day. It's a black fly. Your Chardonnay. It's a death row.
It's embarrassing. Look away, Susan. Look away. Look at you.
It's like
I know, it's fucked up. It's fucked up. And it gets worse. Watch. It gets worse.
I'm just like, oh my god! I'm totally oblivious. Oh jeez.
I know, this is the most fucked up thing I've ever heard. Don't lean back.
That would be a fun
Don't
one.
lean back. Okay, stop leaning back. Sorry. Oh.
Look at us laughing. You should share that one. It's hilarious. It really is. Oh, you're not recording it?
It's being recorded.
Oh, yeah. Yes, I'm waiting.
And it comes with the sound. Our voices and I'm over here. What?
I love it. Okay, I'm ready.
Oh,
there it is. See? There I go again.
Chicken's right here.
You done talking about the chicken. Oh, okay. Oh, I'm ready. Holy.
It's fucked up. It's funny as fuck. Oh, now you looked at the chicken. Oh, I saw that. I saw those eyes looking at the chicken.
Yeah. It's fun. Okay, let's see. Yeah. No, aren't you gonna see?
Yeah.
Slice and dice. No, they're just warm now.
Oh, hot
Yeah,
pad. Look, why is your throat place?
I don't know.
There's only two people here.
I don't know. It's for in case somebody drops them off. Like next week.
Oh, you want? Oh, no. This is like survey votes. Oh, I'll look at that.
How do you build the unexpected?
Wow. You like winning?
Yes.
You start by building a track. You throw up some lights, connect some screens, program some ones and zeros, set up a camera, or 2, or 20. Then, when you're good and ready,
1, 2, 3, go.
saddle up your
Oh, it's too big a piece, but thank you.
and invite everyone to hop on and ride.
This is gonna be wild.
This shit, aren't you?
Yeah,
It's fun.
I'm watching our interaction.
It's so strange.
Let's see. This has some food.
Oh! Angel's the winner here, so he takes a quick lap. That was all me! This is sick!
Oh, but this part of it. It's sound music.
For me, Wesley Town! I'm in control of this vehicle!
This is ridiculous. You will just lie.
Are you kidding me, boy?
Now let's get the cranberries.
Testosterone is what makes a man a man.
Mm.
But if you're eating foods that raise your estrogen, you're never going to have high testosterone. I've been eating.
I want you to
Bon appetit.
I'm happy for you. I wish nothing but the best for you both. I know the virgin of me, if she perverted like me, would she go down on you in a theater? Yeah, that's my mate, and if she have your baby, I'm sure she'd make a really excellent mother. Cause the love that you gave me, babe, was a baby for the name that I for you to be your wife. No. Every time you speak her name, does she know how you told me you're hungry until you die? Till you die, but it's still alive, and I'm here to remind you of the mess you left when you were away. It's not fair to deny me of the cross I bear that you did to me. You ought to know. You seem very well.
It is, but it's a good kind of crazy.
I'm not quite as well. I thought you should know. Did you forget about me? Mr. Duplicity. I hate to find you in the middle of dinner. There was a slap in the face. How quickly I was replaced. And I am thinking of me when you fuck her. It's a love that you gave me when the name of a man get enough for you to be open wide. Every time you speak her name, you know how you told me you'd hold it until you die, but it's still alive, and I'm here to remind you of the mess you left when you went away. It's not fair to deny
I was watching the video, that's why.
No, it's so strange. I'm starting to get used to it, but not yet. It's like you have something else going on, but you're looking at yourself. Like,
Yeah. Very strange. Don't look at me. Oh, God. Stop staring at ourselves. What?
I can't stop. I can't stop. I've been doing this for 4 hours now. And the thing is, when you play, oh yeah, no, I didn't go out.
Can you feel it? Well, I'm here to remind you of the mess you left when you went away. It's not fair to deny me of the cross I bear. You did to me, you ought to know I'm here to remind you of the mess you left when you went away. It's not fair to deny me of the cross I bear that you did to me. You ought to know.
Don't be shy. Put back, take some, whatever you want. Oh,
With the new Lightning Lotto from OLG, you could win big right on the spot.
Really?
Whoa. You don't strike the jackpot strikes you.
Oh, you like that? Oh, good. I didn't know you liked it. Look.
I didn't see you do that.
See, there's a lot of things you
Oh
can
my
say.
God.
It was cute. It was cute. I did it on purpose. It's like,
I have to watch you, man. Jeez.
look at you. You say too much. So I say something. Now we're going to
And all I can do is just want something to do. It's been my point of view. It's not safe. It's not safe. I just want someone to say please. I'll always be there when you wait. You know I like to keep my cheeks dry today. So stay with me and I don't understand why I sleep all day. And I start to complain that there's no way. And all I can do is read to stay awake. It makes my life
with a knife.
It's a great escape.
A knife. Good night. You know what? You wish this
You like my going to without insane. It's not sane. It's not sane. I just want I'll always be there when you wait. You know I like to keep my cheeks dry today. So stay with me and I'll be
Like you were telling me about the green light.
This is 6,240 kilometers per 2,600 miles from the United States. This is the wild, wild world.
This is
They say grapevine can't be hidden. We say
Wait, I want
watch
to see
this.
this.
This is not the old world, new world. This is a whole other world.
Wait, don't put on.
Guys, new tradition. We are many regions, but we are one nation. We are Canadian winemakers.
Not there. There. Oh no, sorry, I'm confused. Over.
Medium super fly, super duper fly, medium super fly.
Sorry, I meant over here. There you are.
Don't let go of me. Like, take your hand off my knees. When the rain hits my window, I take it.
be some, be that Timberland, be sing a jangle.
You'll actually
So
be
tight
able to
that
look
you get our style tangled.
at it. You're
Swing
right.
those people like a double. Can we
I
get
think you have.
nine like Coco? So. You wanna play with my yo-yo? I smoke my future. I can't stand it. It's my window. I can't stand it. It's my window. I can't stand it.
You like it? I was sweating bullets trying to figure out what the hell was good for you. And I didn't want to go to any fast food shit.
It's my window. Beep, beep. Who got the keys to the Jeep? I'm driving to the beach. Top down, loud sound, see my peeps. Get some pounds down, look who it be. It be me, and Timothy. Looks like it's about to rain, what a shame. I got the armor or the shine of the same. Old Missy, try to maintain. I can't stand around.
Oh, you gave me some of it. I saw that. No, Governor Ticker, you are me right now.
It's my window. I can't stand around. I feel the wind, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 9, 10. Then I sit on heels like Lorraine until the rain starts coming down and pouring on the chair. I got my umbrella, my finger waving, they fall like trumpet. I break up with him before he jump. To have me, yes, you love me, yes, you love me. It's my window. I can't stand it. It's my window. I can't stand it.
Yo, you're watching us 10 seconds ago.
It's my window. I can't stand it.
It's fun, it's good. Because there's so much shit going on between us that we don't see. There's so much shit going on. Yeah.
I can't stand it. I can't stand it. I can't stand it.
You just do it.
I can't stand it. It's my window. I can't stand it.
You know what?
It's my window. I can't stand it.
Chicken dinner,
It's my window. I can't stand
Who
it.
doesn't? All year round.
I can't stand it.
It's delicious.
I'll get a chicken and get cranberry and we'll have stuffing and I'll eat it like in July even. Yeah. And I also like, if no cranberries, I like to do beets and mash them all down with the chicken and make sandwiches.
I'm broke, but
Well, we're
I'm
talking-
happy.
We're having a heavy
I'm
conversation.
poor, but I'm kind. I'm short, but I'm healthy. Yeah. I'm high, but I'm grounded. I'm sane, but I'm overwhelmed. I'm lost, but I'm hopeful, baby. And what it all comes down to
Remember when you were like,
I'm that big wing girl. That's yours.
if you want, I'd move the shirt.
Cause I've got one hand in
You're 40 cents away.
and the other one is giving a high five.
Yeah, I think you're right.
I feel drunk, but I'm sober. I'm young and I'm underpaid. I'm tired, but I'm working. I care, but I'm restless. I'm here, but I'm really gone.
Susan!
I'm wrong and I'm
Where'd you
sorry.
go?
Baby, and what it all comes down to is that everything's gotta be quite alright. focused. I'm green, but I'm wise. I'm kind, but I'm friendly, baby. I'm sad, but I'm laughing. I'm brave, but I'm chicken shit. I'm sick, but I'm pretty. Baby, when you want downtown. Comes down to my friends, yeah, is that everything is just fine, fine, fine. 'Cause I got one hand in my pocket and the other one is in a taxi cab.
Rocky. There you go again.
I gotta pee.
Okay.
I just told the world I gotta pee. You're like, oh. Isn't that crazy?
Introducing slices and sticks. 4 slices of pepperoni pizza together with 8 Italian cheese sticks. A combination as unexpected as the sexy telephone.
Hey, Mom.
New slices and sticks, just $6.99.
Delivery.
Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Look.
Don't be shy, don't about voice. Check out the new weapon choice. Don't be shy, don't about voice. Check out the new weapon choice. It's the weapon of choice. Yeah. You can blow with this, you can blow with that. You can blow with this, you can blow with that. You can blow with this, you can blow with that. You can blow with us. You can blow with this, you can blow with that. You can blow with this, you can blow with that. You can blow with walk without rhythm, it won't attract the one. Walk without rhythm, and it won't attract the one. Walk without rhythm, and it won't attract the one. If you walk without rhythm, you never learn.
What were you doing 10 minutes ago? There you go. There you go. Put some fruit away. There you go. Put some fruit away. Watching the TV. You could do it this. You drink.
Shut it back. Oh, shit. Should we do this on TV? Come on.
to unleash the Titans. Lonnie, I'm trying to unleash the Titans. Oh, yeah. Oh, shit.
What shit?
I'm just trying to think what the fuck else was gonna have. I was gonna have, okay, things are moving. Oh, yeah. I'm doing the Certes. I'm in charge of the Certes.
Woohoo! Oh, there she goes.
But you please understand, see this video here?
Yeah.
Like, this is the music that's playing in the background.
Nice.
Sky tissue that I wish you saw. Side compliment to know it all. I'll close your eyes and I'll kiss you.
Oh, you're
Birds of shade. With birds of shade, it's a lonely view. With birds of shade, it's a lonely view. Put me up against the wall. Young tuck belly, push up bra. I'm falling all over myself.
There she goes.
Your heart is your haircut. With birds of shade, it's a lonely view. With birds of shade, it's a lonely view. With birds of shade, it's a lonely view.
No, yeah, no. Yeah, see the ear. This is comes over. That's you.
It's a lonely view. Spoken with broken jaw. Step outside, but not to brawl in. Autumn sweet wind, call the fall out. Make it to the moon, never have to crawl in. With the shed, it's a lonely view. With the shed, it's a lonely view. With the shed, it's a lonely view.
It's a little faster now. It's really talking.
Sky fish that I wish you saw. Side cabin meant to know it
Oh, it's
all.
watching
But close your eyes and I'll kiss you, cause with birds of shade. With birds of shade, it's a lonely view. With birds of shade, it's a lonely view. With birds of shade, it's a lonely view.
What was the thing before?
I think I was saying that was me watching the video. That's why she's Wait, watch. Your eyes shifting that way.
So, by the way, right now, you and me, we're the only people that have this.
What's going on, guys? I'm Morgan Wallen.
Released this Thursday. Set a reminder only on YouTube.
Yeah. Just put it out there.
I
Just say this was
no
locked down on day
choice
4.
but to hear you. You stated your case.
It's actually called lockdown
I thought about it. You treat me like a princess. I'm not used to like that. You ask how my day was. You've already won me over. Don't be alone if I fall.
surprised to find out for all that you are. I couldn't help it. It's all your fault. Your love is thick and it's swallowed me whole. You're so much braver than I give you credit for. That's not lip service. You've already won me over. In spite of me, don't be alone if I fall hand over feet. And don't be surprised to find out you for all that you are. I couldn't help it. It's all your fault. You are the bearer of unconditional. You held your breath and the door for me. Thanks for your patience.
I didn't realize that was touching.
That's really nice. It's good to see that for me. Because I think we just need to put on this is
Oh, there we go. You missed it.
Best listener that I've ever met. You're my best friend. Best friend with benefits.
You did the counter.
What are you doing to the counter?
What? You can see I'm sweeping up crumbs. Oh, there you touch me again.
I've never.
Oh! I mean, every time you touch me, I drink.
I never wanted something rational.
I don't even remember doing that.
Aware now.
Oh, I dropped.
Yeah, there you go down.
Oh, it's too fucked up.
Aware now. You've already won in spite of me. Don't be alone if I fall. Get on your feet. And don't be surprised to find out for all that you are. I couldn't help it. It's all your fault. You've already won me over. It's don't be alone if I fall. Head on your feet. And don't be surprised to find out you for all that you. It's all your fault.
What happened? It's stuck now.
Kingdom meeting until I get photos.
Photos? What photos? Well, let's eat that later too.
Yeah, I want to take pictures.
Oh, you want to take pictures?
first.
That's sweet.
Jesus.
I'm sorry, Jesus. Can I retire now?
Are you eating? One of us will one? I'll
Yes,
serve for you.
You sure? Okay. Evening, Dan Bronson.
Just so they walk into a Germany or something.
VIP.
Okay, what am I doing? Can you bless the wine?
Please, my brother.
Hey, you know we're still on.
Oh, yeah. Go. I don't want people to see us dancing.
All right, stop. Collaborate and listen. I step back to a brand new invention.
But I don't think anybody's watching us because we're in.
Will it ever stop? Yo, I don't know. Turn off the lights and I'll roll. To the extreme, I rock a mic.
Hey, good news.
Light up the stage and wax the chalk like a king.
Half the wine still there, man.
Speaking that boom,
Top
I'm
it up
feeling your
properly.
brain like a voice missing much from century. When I play a dope melody, anything less than the best is a felony. Love it, so leave it. You better change way. You better get rules out of kids don't play. If it was a problem, yo, I'll solve it. Check out the book while my DJ revolves it. want no bacon. Cooking them seeds like a pound of bacon. Burning them, getting quick and nimble. I go crazy when I hear a cymbal and hi-hat with a souped up tempo. I'm on a roll, it's time to go solo. Rolling. Here's my 5.0 with my rag top down so my hair can blow. The girlies on standby, waiting just to say hi. Did you stop? No, I just drove by, kept on. Pursuing to the next stop. I was 11, I'm heading to the next block. The block dead, yo, so I continue to A1A. Girls were hot, wearing less than bikinis. Rocking in lovers, driving Lamborghinis. Jealous, cause I'm out getting mine. Shade with the gauge and vanilla with the 9. Ready for the chumps on the wall. The chumps acting ill because I'm full of 8-ball. Gunshots rings out like a bell. I grab my 9 while I hunt for the shell. Falling on the concrete real fast. Jumped in my car, slammed on the gas. Bumper to bumper, that. Trying to get away from the jack. Police on the scene, you know what I mean? They got me up, we run it all, but don't mean if it was a problem, yo, I'll solve it. Check out the hook on my DJ for the boss.
Motherfuckers.
Cause I'm a lyrical poet. My aim is on the scene just in case you know.
There's a chicken.
Like me on my face sound. When the shit keep holding the ground from the rhymes can vision and feel. Conducting more business.
That's what you think the bacon thing was like. It has it was good. I was watching TikTok.
Other kids say, damn, I'm a drug, I'm selling by the gram. Keep on composing when it's time to get loose. Magnetized by the mic while I kick my shoes. If there was a problem, yo, I'll solve it. Check out the hook while DJ was Austin.
I'm sorry. I thought it literally floated. Very well.
Let's get out of here. Word to the mother.